The snow fell in sheets of white vengeance the night Emma Wilson received the proposal. Windward Manor's grand library, with its mahogany shelves reaching toward heaven like desperate prayers, had never felt so suffocating. She stood frozen, dustcloth still clutched in her trembling fingers, as James Montgomery, master of the house, owner of half the shipping lanes in Oakridge Harbor, and widower of 3 bitter years, looked at her with eyes that never quite revealed their truth. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. "You'll marry me by month's end," he said, not asked. His voice was rough-edged like sea glass, worn smooth in some places, dangerously sharp in others. "Oliver needs a mother figure, the house needs a mistress, and you—" His gaze slid over her plain grey dress, the one she'd mended 7 times at the seams. "You need security." Emma's heart hammered against her ribs, a wild, trapped thing. The proposal made no sense. She was nothing, a servant girl with calloused hands and second-hand shoes, hired to dust his precious books and polish silver that cost more than everything she'd ever owned. She'd been invisible in this house for 2 years, speaking only when spoken to, keeping her eyes lowered, her thoughts locked away, until that night 2 weeks ago when she thought herself alone. "Mr. Montgomery," she whispered, "you can't possibly mean—" "I do." He turned away, staring out the frost-laced window toward the churning ocean beyond. "The arrangements will be made. Simple ceremony, nothing extravagant." Emma stood still as stone, unable to form words. Around her, the library's shadows deepened, crawling along the walls like living things. Outside, the winter storm howled, matching the confusion in her mind. "Why?" she finally managed. James Montgomery didn't turn back to face her. His shoulders, broad beneath expensive wool, tensed slightly. "Does it matter? You have nothing. I'm offering you everything." Before she could gather courage for another question, he walked out, boots echoing against polished floors. Left. Alone, Emma sank to her knees, the dust cloth falling from her grip. What game was this wealthy man playing, and what choice did she really have? The news spread through Oakridge Harbor like wildfire in dry brush. The wealthy James Montgomery, shipping magnate and most eligible widower in 3 counties, was marrying his servant girl, plain, quiet Emma Wilson, with her downcast eyes and faded dresses. Whispers sliced through drawing rooms and taverns alike, theories spinning like autumn leaves in bitter wind, a scandal hidden beneath respectability. The poor girl must be with child. A desperate man making desperate choices. A cruel joke on society. Emma heard none of it directly. The walls of Windward Manor kept her insulated from the worst of the gossip, but she wasn't blind to the changed glances from the other servants. Some pitying, some envious, none understanding. Only Mrs. Fitzgerald, the elderly housekeeper who had shown Emma kindness since her first terrified day, dared speak plainly. "Child," she said one evening, finding Emma folding linens with such intensity her knuckles had gone white, "what has happened between you and the master is your business. But whatever comes next, remember your worth isn't tied to his name or his fortune." Emma's hand stilled. "There's nothing between us, Mrs. Fitzgerald, nothing at all." The older woman's weathered face softened. "Then why marry you?" Emma turned away, unable to voice her suspicions that somehow, some way, James Montgomery had discovered her secret. The one thing she'd kept hidden since arriving at Windward Manor with nothing but a small trunk and desperate hope. "Perhaps he simply needs someone to care for Oliver," Emma said quietly. At the mention of the boy, both women's expressions gentled. Oliver Montgomery, 8 years old and solemn as a judge, had spoken barely 30 words since his mother's death 3 years ago. He wandered the grand halls of Windward Manor like a ghost, trailing his fingers along wallpaper that cost more than most men made in a year, his eyes holding shadows no child should know. "That child needs more than a caretaker," Mrs. Fitzgerald said. "He needs love." Emma nodded, thinking of Oliver's small, serious face. Unlike his father, the boy had always seen her. Sometimes she would find him watching her as she polished the banister or swept the hearth, his gaze curious rather than dismissive. Once, he had silently handed her a seashell, perfectly intact, then disappeared before she could thank him. "I can give him that at least," Emma whispered. The wedding preparations moved forward with mechanical precision. Emma was measured for a dress she never asked to see. Papers were signed, arrangements made. Through it all, James Montgomery maintained his distance, speaking to her only when necessary, his eyes never quite meeting hers. If he felt anything about their impending union, regret, satisfaction, even mere acknowledgement, he kept it buried, beneath a stony exterior. It was 3 days before the wedding when Victoria Harrington arrived. The sister of James's late wife swept into Windward Manor like an advancing storm, bringing trunks of finery, a personal lady's maid, and an undisguised contempt for Emma that sliced like the sharpest knife. "So," Victoria said, finding Emma, arranging flowers in the morning room, "you're the little nobody who's managed to ensnare my brother-in-law." Emma stiffened, but kept her eyes on the roses. "Good morning, Mrs. Harrington." Victoria circled her slowly, the expensive rustle of her taffeta gown filling the silence. "What a clever girl you must be. From servant to mistress of Windward Manor, your mother must be so proud." "My mother is dead," Emma said quietly, "as is my father." "Ah, the orphan servant, even more pathetic." Victoria leaned closer, her perfume expensively cloying. "Let me make something abundantly clear, Miss Wilson. Whatever game you think you're playing, whatever scheme you've concocted, I will not allow you to dishonor my sister's memory or damage my nephew's future." Emma finally looked up, meeting the cold blue eyes so different from James's storm grey ones. "I have no scheme, Mrs. Harrington. I simply accepted a proposal." Victoria's perfectly painted lips curved in a smile that held no warmth. "A proposal? How romantic! And did my brother-in-law drop to one knee as well? Did he speak of love and devotion?" Emma said nothing, which was answer enough. "I thought not." Victoria straightened, adjusting an already perfect sleeve. "Well, you've certainly stirred up quite the scandal. The gossip has reached even Boston. People are taking bets on how long this farce will last." She laughed lightly. "Personally, I think James is punishing himself for something. He always did have a flair for self-destruction after Caroline died." The mention of James's late wife hung in the air between them. Emma had seen her portrait in the gallery upstairs, a beautiful woman with golden hair and a serene smile. Everything Emma was not. Or perhaps, Victoria continued, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper, "He's punishing you. Did you ever consider that, Miss Wilson? That this is some elaborate joke at your expense?" Before Emma could respond, the door opened. Oliver stood there, small and watchful, his dark eyes moving from his aunt to Emma. "Aunt Victoria," he said softly, the rare sound of his voice momentarily stunning both women. "Father said you arrived." Victoria's demeanor transformed instantly, melting into performative warmth. "Oliver, darling." She swept toward him, arms outstretched. "How you've grown. Come give your auntie a kiss." Oliver allowed himself to be embraced, his body stiff, his eyes still fixed on Emma over his aunt's shoulder. When Victoria finally released him, he didn't move closer to her as expected. Instead, he walked to Emma's side and quietly took her hand. The gesture, small but deliberate, sent a flush of color across Victoria's cheeks. "Oliver," she said, her voice tight, "why Don't you show me what new books you've been reading? I brought you presents from Boston. The boy's fingers tightened around Emma's. Miss Wilson was teaching me about flowers, he said. Roses have thorns to protect themselves. Victoria's smile became brittle. How educational, but surely you'd rather see your gifts. Oliver looked up at Emma, a question in his eyes. Go with your aunt, Emma said gently. We can finish our lesson tomorrow. He nodded solemnly and released her hand. As Victoria led him away, throwing a triumphant glance over her shoulder, Emma returned to the roses, her fingers brushing against their thorns with new appreciation. That night, unable to sleep, Emma slipped from her small servants' quarters for the last time. In 3 days, she would move to the mistress's chambers, a thought that filled her with equal parts dread and disbelief. Her soft footsteps echoed in the empty corridors as she made her way through the sleeping house. She hadn't planned a destination, but her feet carried her inevitably to the music room. Moonlight spilled through tall windows, illuminating the grand piano that stood as the centerpiece of the room. For 2 years, Emma had dusted its gleaming surface, polished its ivory keys, but never once touched it as it was meant to be touched. Glancing over her shoulder to ensure she was truly alone, Emma sat on the bench. The cool ivory keys beckoned beneath her fingertips. 2 years of silence. 2 years of pretending she didn't understand the language of music, that her father hadn't spent his life teaching her before illness and poverty took everything. She began to play. The melody started soft, hesitant, like the first raindrops. Before a storm, then it built, growing in complexity and emotion, all the feelings Emma had locked away pouring through her fingers. Joy, fear, confusion, longing. The music gave voice to everything she could not say. So lost was she in the sound that she didn't notice the figure in the doorway until the final notes faded into silence. So, this is your secret. Emma whirled around, nearly falling from the bench. James Montgomery stood in shadows, dressed in evening clothes as if he had just returned from somewhere. His face was unreadable. "Mr. Montgomery," she gasped. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have—" "Who taught you?" he interrupted, stepping into the room. "And don't lie to me. No one plays Chopin like that without training." Emma's hands twisted in her lap. "My father. He was a music teacher at the conservatory in Boston before he became ill." James moved closer, moonlight revealing his expression. Not anger as she'd expected, but something more complex. "And yet you've been dusting my piano for 2 years without mentioning this particular skill. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." "It wasn't relevant to my position," Emma said softly. "No," he agreed, stopping before her. "It wasn't." Silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken questions. Finally, Emma gathered her courage. "Mr. Montgomery, please, why are you marrying me?" For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he sighed, a sound so weary it seemed to come from some deep, wounded place. "Because 2 weeks ago, I heard you playing when you thought no one was home. Because for the first time in 3 years, Oliver stopped outside this room and listened without that hollow look in his eyes. Because my son hasn't spoken more than a dozen words since his mother died, but yesterday he asked me if you would read to him after dinner." He ran a hand through his dark hair. "And because I'm tired, Miss Wilson, tired of living in a mausoleum, with a ghost for a son and memories that cut like glass." Emma stared at him, speechless. "I don't offer love," he continued, his voice hardening again. "I can't, but I can offer you security, position, comfort. In return, I ask that you be kind to my son and bring some life back into this house. A mutually beneficial arrangement, nothing more. Before she could respond, he turned and walked to the door. There he paused, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't decipher. "Play again," he said, "whenever you wish." Then he was gone. Emma sat motionless, her mind whirling with new understanding. Not a cruel joke after all, but a desperate gamble. A man drowning in grief, reaching for anything that might save his child. She looked down at the piano keys, gleaming in the moonlight. Then slowly, she began to play again. Softer this time, a lullaby her father had taught her when she was small. As the gentle notes filled the room, she made her decision. If music could reach places words could not, perhaps it could heal what was broken in this house, and perhaps in healing Windward Manor, she might find healing herself. The day of the wedding dawned clear and cold, the sky a brittle blue that promised nothing. Emma stood in what would soon be her bedroom, staring at her reflection in a mirror taller than she was. The dress they'd given her was simple by wealthy standards, but finer than anything she'd ever owned. Pale blue silk with delicate pearl buttons down the back. "You look lovely, Miss Wilson," said the maid who had been assigned to help her dress. The girl, barely 16 and wide-eyed at the strange circumstances, had been nervous all morning, clearly unsure how to treat someone transitioning so suddenly from fellow servant to mistress. "Thank you, Sarah," Emma replied, smoothing the fabric with trembling hands. "And please, after today, I hope you'll feel comfortable calling me Emma when we're alone." The girl's eyes widened further, but she nodded. A soft knock at the door revealed Mrs. Fitzgerald, who dismissed the young maid with a gentle nod. "The minister has arrived," she said, approaching Emma with a small wooden box. "The ceremony will begin in half an hour." She opened the box, revealing a simple strand of pearls. "These were mine on my wedding day. I thought perhaps you might wear them." Tears threatened to spill from Emma's eyes. "Mrs. Fitzgerald, I couldn't possibly—" "You can and you will," the housekeeper said firmly, reaching up to fasten the necklace. "Every bride deserves something borrowed, something that carries good wishes with it." As the older woman's weathered fingers brushed against her neck, Emma couldn't contain her fears any longer. "What if I'm making a terrible mistake? What if this is all some cruel game?" Victoria said, "Victoria Harrington," Mrs. Fitzgerald interrupted, "has been bitter since the day her sister died. She blames the master for not saving Caroline, though God knows he nearly killed himself trying." She turned Emma to face her, hands firm on her shoulders. "I don't pretend to understand Mr. Montgomery's reasons, but I've known him since he was born, and cruelty for cruelty's sake isn't in his nature." Emma nodded, trying to take comfort in the words. "Now," Mrs. Fitzgerald continued, reaching into her pocket, "there's something else." She pulled out a small tarnished locket on a thin chain. "Young Oliver asked me to give you this. He said it was important you have it before the ceremony." Surprised, Emma accepted the locket. It was old, the engraving worn smooth in places. When she opened it, she found not a portrait as expected, but a tiny, folded piece of paper. Carefully extracting it, she unfolded what appeared to be a scrap of sheet music, hand-notated. "What is it?" Mrs. Fitzgerald asked, peering curiously. "Music," Emma whispered, recognizing it instantly, though she'd never seen this particular piece before. It was the beginning of a lullaby, Caroline Montgomery's lullaby for her son, written in her own hand, a mother's last gift to her child. Emotion welled in Emma's throat. Oliver had given her his most precious possession, permission to take his mother's place, to continue the melody that had been cut short. The small chapel attached to Windward Manor had been built by James's grandfather, a man who preferred private worship to public spectacle. It held perhaps 30 people at most, its stained glass windows casting jewel-toned light across oak, pews worn smooth by generations. Today, it held fewer than a dozen, The minister, a few senior servants including Mrs. Fitzgerald, Dr. Bennet standing as witness, and Victoria Harrington, whose presence felt more supervisory than supportive. No friends, no extended family, a ceremony reduced to its legal necessities. Emma stood at the entrance, the locket now fastened around her neck beneath her dress, its weight a strange comfort against her skin. Before her, at the altar, James waited in formal black, his face composed but unreadable. Beside him stood Oliver, solemn, in a miniature version of his father's attire, his dark eyes finding Emma's immediately. There was no music, no procession. Emma simply walked forward alone, her footsteps echoing in the hushed chapel. As she approached, she saw something flicker across James's face. Not regret or disdain, but something almost like wonder, quickly masked. The ceremony itself was brief, the words ancient and impersonal. Emma spoke her vows in a clear voice that surprised even herself, promising to honor and obey a man she barely knew. When James slid the ring onto her finger, a simple gold band rather than his late wife's diamond, his hands were steady but cold. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the minister intoned. "You may kiss the bride." For a moment, Emma thought James might refuse this final formality. Instead, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in the briefest of touches, a seal on a contract, nothing more. Yet even that fleeting contact sent an unexpected warmth through her body, a sensation she quickly suppressed. As they turned to face the small gathering, Emma felt a small hand slip into hers. Oliver looked up at her, his expression serious but his eyes lighter than she had ever seen them. "Does this mean I should call you mother now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Before Emma could answer, Victoria stepped forward, her smile sharp as broken glass. "Congratulations, James," she said, ignoring Emma entirely. "Such an efficient ceremony. Mother would have approved of the economy, if nothing else." James's jaw tightened. "Thank you for coming, Victoria. I believe refreshments are being served in the drawing room." "No, I wouldn't miss this for the world," she replied, finally turning her gaze to Emma. "Mrs. Montgomery, how quickly fortunes can change." The way she said the name, like something rotten on her tongue, made Emma's spine stiffen. But before she could respond, she felt Oliver's hand tighten in hers. "Aunt Victoria," the boy said, his voice stronger than before. "Miss Wilson, I mean my new mother, knows about music. She can play the piano like the angel's father told me about." Victoria's smile faltered. "Does she indeed? How accomplished?" "Perhaps," James said, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "Emma will play for us after dinner." It was the first time he had used her given name, and something in the way he said it, almost like a challenge to his sister-in-law, gave Emma a strange courage. "I would be happy to," she replied, meeting Victoria's gaze steadily. The small reception that followed was a stilted affair. Dr. Bennet, a kind-faced man with silver at his temples, was the only guest who seemed genuinely pleased by the union. He spoke warmly to Emma, asking about her background without the condescension others had shown. "Music has healing properties, Mrs. Montgomery," he said when she mentioned her father's profession. "Perhaps more than my medicines sometimes. The mind and heart need tending just as the body does." That's precisely what my father always said," Emma replied, surprised to find a kindred spirit. "Your father sounds like a wise man. I hope you'll continue his legacy here." He glanced toward James, who stood by the window in conversation with the minister. "This house has been silent too long." Ujidid. As the afternoon waned and visitors departed, Emma found herself increasingly aware of what lay ahead. Night would come. She was now mistress of Windward Manor, wife to James Montgomery. What would he expect from her? The thought sent heat to her cheeks and anxiety coursing through her veins. Dinner was a quiet affair, just the three of them, James at the head of the table, Emma to his right, Oliver to his left. The boy ate more than Emma had ever seen him eat before, his eyes frequently darting between his father and his new stepmother, as if to reassure himself they were both still there. "Will you play for us now?" he asked as the dessert plates were cleared away. James looked to Emma, one eyebrow raised in question. "Of course," she said, rising from her chair. "I'd be happy to." They moved to the music room, now transformed by evening lamplight into a warm, intimate space. Emma sat at the piano, removing her gloves and flexing her fingers. Oliver climbed onto the bench beside her, his small shoulder pressing against her arm. "What shall I play?" she asked him. The boy hesitated, then whispered, "The song from the locket." Emma nodded, touched that he would share this most private music. From memory, for she had studied the notation carefully, she began to play Caroline's lullaby. The melody was simple but beautiful, full of tenderness and light. As her fingers moved across the keys, she felt Oliver relax beside her, his head eventually coming to rest against her shoulder. When she dared glance up, she found James watching them from the shadows, his expression unguarded for once. Pain, longing, gratitude, all flickered across his face as the lullaby filled the room his wife had once warmed with the same music. Emma continued playing, transitioning seamlessly into other gentle melodies, each flowing into the next like a river, finding its path. She played until Oliver's breathing deepened and his body grew heavy against hers, until he fell asleep for the first time in years without tears or terrors. James approached silently, lifting his son into his arms. "I'll take him to bed," he said quietly. "Wait for me in the library." Emma nodded, her fingers stilling on the keys. As James carried Oliver from the room, she remained seated, trying to calm her racing heart. What would happen now? What did he want from her? The library was warm, a fire crackling in the massive stone hearth. Emma stood before it, watching the flames dance, the gold band on her finger catching the light with each nervous twist of her hands. "He's asleep," James said from the doorway, peacefully for once. Emma turned to face him, suddenly acutely aware that they were truly alone for the first time. "That's good," she said, her voice barely audible over the fire's crackle. James moved into the room, closing the door behind him. He had removed his formal jacket and cravat, his white shirt open at the collar, revealing the strong column of his throat. In the firelight, with his guard lowered, he looked younger, less forbidding. "You're playing," he said, stopping a few feet from her. It was exactly what he needed, what we both needed. "I'm glad," Emma replied, unsure what else to say. James studied her face, his eyes dark and unreadable in the shadowed room. "You're afraid of me," he stated. "Not afraid," she corrected. "Uncertain." His mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile, but something softer than his usual expression. A diplomatic answer. Emma gathered her courage. "Mr. Montgomery?" "James," he interrupted. "You're my wife now, at least when we're alone." "James," she amended, the name strange on her tongue. "I need to understand what you expect from this marriage, from me." He was silent for a long moment, the crackling fire the only sound between them. Then he sighed, running a hand through his dark hair in a gesture she was beginning to recognize as habitual when he was troubled. "I expect you to be kind to my son, to bring music back into this house, to perform the social duties of Mrs. Montgomery, when required." He paused, his eyes meeting hers directly. "As for the rest, I will not demand what you are unwilling to give. We have separate bedrooms. Your door has a lock. Use it if you wish." Relief and something oddly like disappointment mingled in Emma's chest, and if, if someday I choose not to lock it. The question hung in the air between them, bold in a way Emma had never been before. James's eyes darkened, and he took a step closer to her. "Then I would consider myself fortunate," he said quietly, "but I won't expect it." Emma nodded, her cheeks warming under his steady gaze. "There's something else you should know," she said suddenly, reaching for the locket beneath her dress. "Something I've kept hidden. The reason I came to Windward Manor, specifically, why I sought employment in your household." James watched as she removed the locket, opening it to reveal the folded music. "You see," Emma said softly, "before my father died, he had one last student, a beautiful woman who wanted to surprise her husband and son with a special gift. Music she was composing herself, despite having little formal training. She came to our small apartment in Boston once a week for lessons." Emma's voice trembled slightly. "Her name was Caroline Montgomery." James went completely still, his face draining of color. "Caroline, my Caroline," Emma nodded. "She was determined to create something lasting, something that would express her love when words failed. She worked on that lullaby for months, perfecting every note. She spoke of you and Oliver constantly, how she wanted to fill your home with music, to teach your son to play." James's hand reached out, trembling slightly, as he touched the edge of the notation. "She never told me she was taking lessons." "It was to be a surprise," Emma explained gently, "for your anniversary, but then she fell ill and never recovered," he finished, his voice hollow. "When my father was dying," Emma continued, "he made me promise to bring her music where it belonged, to fulfill her wish somehow. So after his death, when I had nothing left, I came here. I didn't plan to stay long, just to find a way to give you the music and then move on, but then..." "Then what?" James prompted when she faltered. "Then I saw Oliver," she whispered. "So quiet, so sad, and I couldn't leave. I thought perhaps someday I might find a way to share her gift with him, even if never with you." James stared at her, something breaking open in his expression. "All this time," he said hoarsely, "you've been carrying a piece of her." Emma nodded, closing the locket and holding it out to him. "It belongs to you and Oliver. I only kept it safe." But James didn't take it. Instead, he gently closed her fingers around the locket. "No," he said, "she would want you to have it. You brought her music home when I couldn't bear to hear it." Their hands remained joined, the locket warm between their palms. In that moment, something shifted between them. Not love, not yet, but understanding. Recognition of shared purpose. "I married you because you made my son smile," James said quietly. "But I think perhaps there was more guiding my decision than I knew." Emma looked up at him, seeing him clearly for the first time, not as the forbidding master of Windward Manor or her new husband, but as a man who had lost his way and was trying to find it again. "Play for me," he said suddenly. "Not Caroline's lullaby, but something of your own. Show me who Emma Montgomery is." And in that moment, Emma realized what she had revealed on her wedding night was not just a connection to his past, but a promise for their future. Music to heal the silence, courage to face the pain, and perhaps someday, a harmony none of them had dared to imagine. Morning light spilled through the tall windows of Emma's new bedchamber, casting long golden fingers across the silk counterpane. She had slept poorly, her mind racing with revelations and possibilities. The room, Caroline's room, though no one had said as much, was beautiful but felt borrowed, a space where memories lingered in the corners like cobwebs too delicate to disturb. Emma rose, crossing to the window that overlooked the eastern gardens. From here, she could see the thin ribbon of path that led to the lighthouse garden at the property's edge, the place James had mentioned his late wife loved most. The garden sat dormant now, winter-locked, waiting for spring's gentle awakening. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, drawing her robe tighter. Sarah, the young maid assigned to her, entered with a breakfast tray. "Good morning, Mrs. Montgomery," she said, the title still awkward on her tongue. "I've brought your tea and toast. The master said you might wish to breakfast in your room today." "Thank you, Sarah," Emma replied, gesturing toward a small table by the window. As the girl arranged the tray, Emma noticed her darting glances, curious, uncertain. "Is something troubling you?" Emma asked gently. Sarah flushed. "No, Ma'am. I mean, it's not my place." "We were colleagues just yesterday," Emma reminded her. "Please speak freely." The girl hesitated, then blurted, "Everyone downstairs is talking. About you and the master. About how you spent the night in separate rooms. Mrs. Harrington, she said some unkind things at breakfast." "Of course." Victoria would notice, Emma thought. Of course she would comment. "People will always talk, Sarah," she said, keeping her voice steady. "But what happens between Mr. Montgomery and myself is private." "Yes, ma'am," Sarah nodded, bobbing a quick curtsy before heading toward the door. There she paused, half turning. "It's just, we all hoped. Well, Oliver smiled at breakfast today. First time in forever. He asked for extra jam like a regular boy." The simple observation warmed Emma more than the tea ever could. "Thank you for telling me that," she said softly. Left alone, Emma sipped her tea and considered the strange new shape her life had taken. Yesterday, she had been Emma Wilson, orphaned servant with a secret mission. Today, she was Mrs. Montgomery, mistress of Windward Manor, stepmother to a wounded child, wife in name to a man whose grief had carved him hollow. And what of James? After their conversation in the library, he had walked her to her chamber door, pausing only to press a formal kiss to her hand before bidding her good night. His eyes had held questions, but he'd asked none aloud, giving her the space he'd promised. Emma finished her breakfast quickly, eager to begin finding her place in this new life. She dressed in the simplest of her new gowns, a deep green wool, with minimal trimming, and arranged her hair in a practical knot. The wedding ring felt foreign on her finger, its weight a constant reminder of promises made but not yet understood. Downstairs, she found the house quiet. A footman informed her that James had left early for his shipping office in town, and Oliver was with his tutor in the small schoolroom off the library. With no immediate duties to attend to, Emma decided to explore her new domain. Windward Manor was larger than it appeared from outside, with wings extending like welcoming arms around a central courtyard. Emma wandered through sitting rooms done in rich brocades, galleries lined with somber portraits, and cozy nooks tucked into unexpected corners. The house breathed history and privilege, generations of Montgomerys captured in brass fittings and carved wood. It was in the East Wing, rarely used according to Mrs. Fitzgerald, that Emma discovered the conservatory, a glorious space of glass and iron, humid with plant life even in winter. Palms reached toward the ceiling, ferns unfurled in verdant abundance, and small citrus trees bore miniature fruit. In the center stood a wrought iron bench surrounded by orchids of every hue. "My sister loved this room," Victoria's voice cut through Emma's wonder like a blade. "She spent hours here when she was carrying Oliver. James had it built especially for her." Emma turned to find her sister-in-law watching from the doorway, elegantly attired in visiting clothes despite the early hour. "It's beautiful," Emma said simply, refusing to be provoked. Victoria moved into the room, trailing gloved fingers over a glossy leaf. Caroline had a gift with growing things. These orchids were her special project. Her gaze sharpened. "I wonder how long they'll survive now." The implication was clear. Just as the flowers would wither without Caroline's care, so too would this marriage fail without her blessing. Emma straightened her shoulders. Perhaps they simply need attention, she replied. Living things often respond to being seen and valued. Victoria's laugh held no humor. Is that what you think you're doing here? Seeing and valuing what others missed? How noble, how convenient for a girl with nothing to suddenly have everything. Emma met her gaze steadily. I don't have everything, Mrs. Harrington. I have responsibilities I never sought, and a family wounded in ways I'm only beginning to understand. Family? Victoria scoffed. You've been Mrs. Montgomery for less than a day. Don't pretend to... Mama Emma! Oliver's voice, breathless with excitement, interrupted as he burst into the conservatory. He skidded to a stop when he saw his aunt, his expression immediately closing like a flower at dusk. Oliver, Victoria crooned, extending her arms. Darling, you shouldn't run indoors. What would your mother say? The boy's face fell further at the mention of his mother, but he allowed Victoria's embrace with the resigned patience of a child, accustomed to unwanted affection. Over his aunt's shoulder, his eyes found Emma's, uncertain, seeking reassurance. Did you need something, Oliver? Emma asked gently. He nodded, extracting himself from Victoria's grasp. Mr. Collins says I can stop arithmetic if you'll teach me piano instead. The hope in his voice was palpable. He says music uses numbers too. Before Emma could respond, Victoria interjected sharply. Don't be ridiculous. Your education follows. A specific curriculum approved by your father. Miss Wilson, she emphasized the name pointedly, doesn't have the qualifications to... Actually, Emma interrupted quietly, my father was Professor Henry Wilson of the Boston Conservatory. I was educated alongside his students from the time I could reach the keys. She knelt to Oliver's level, ignoring Victoria's shocked expression. I would be honored to teach you, if your father approves. The boy's face transformed, a smile, breaking through like sunlight after storm. Papa already said yes. That's why I came to find you. He sent a message with Mr. Collins. Victoria's complexion paled beneath its careful rouge. James approved this, without consulting me. I wasn't aware he needed your consultation on matters concerning his son, Emma replied, rising to her feet. She extended her hand to Oliver. Shall we begin now? I believe there's time before lunch. The boy's small fingers curled around hers eagerly. As Emma led him from the conservatory, she felt Victoria's gaze burning between her shoulder blades, a declaration of war in a battle. Emma hadn't chosen but wouldn't surrender. The music room welcomed them like an old friend, morning light cascading across the gleaming piano. Emma settled Oliver beside her on the bench, noting how his feet dangled well above the floor. First, she explained, we must understand how to sit properly. She guided his posture, showing him how to hold his back straight without tension, how to position his hands above the keys. Our bodies are instruments too. If we're stiff or slouched, the music suffers. Oliver listened with intense concentration, mimicking her positions exactly. When she demonstrated a simple 5-note scale, his eyes tracked the movement of her fingers with unwavering focus. Now you try, she encouraged. His first attempt was halting, uncertain, his small fingers pressing too hard. Emma gently corrected him, demonstrating again at a slower pace. On his second try, the notes emerged clearer, more confident. Excellent, she praised, delighting in his answering smile. Did my real mother play like you? He asked suddenly, his hands stilling on the keys. The question caught Emma by surprise. She was learning, she answered truthfully. But music comes in many forms. Your mother composed. She created her own melodies. Oliver considered this, like making up stories, but with sound. Exactly like that, Emma nodded. The lullaby you gave me, that was her creation, her gift to you. The boy's brow furrowed in thought. Could you teach me to play it? Her song. Emma's heart constricted. I would be honored to, she said softly, placing her hands over his to guide them to the correct keys. Let's begin with the melody, the voice of the song. Together, they coaxed the first phrase of Caroline's lullaby from the piano, Oliver's face a study in concentration. When the final notes faded, he looked up at Emma with something close to wonder. "It sounds like her," he whispered. "How I remember her." Emma blinked back sudden tears. "That's the magic of music, Oliver. It keeps those we love close to us, even when they're gone." They continued for another half hour, Oliver absorbing each lesson with remarkable quickness. By the time Mr. Collins came to retrieve him for his history studies, the boy had mastered the basic hand positions and could play a simple C major scale with growing confidence. "You're a natural musician," Emma told him as he reluctantly slid from the bench. "We'll practice again tomorrow." His answering smile was like sunrise, hesitant at first, then blooming with warmth. On impulse, he hugged her quickly before dashing after his tutor, leaving Emma with the lingering impression of small arms and a heart too long withholding its affection. The remainder of the morning passed in a blur of domestic consultations. Mrs. Fitzgerald introduced Emma to the housekeeper's ledgers, the menu planning books, the staff rotation schedules, all the invisible machinery that kept Windward Manor functioning smoothly. Through it all, Emma felt the careful assessment of the household staff, their cautious acceptance alternating with lingering suspicion. "They'll come around," Mrs. Fitzgerald assured her, noticing Emma's awareness of the sidelong glances. "Change is always difficult, especially in a house that's seen such sorrow." "I don't wish to change what works well," Emma replied, closing the household accounts carefully, only to find my place within it. Mrs. Fitzgerald's weathered face softened. "That's wise, my dear. Wiser than many who've come to this position with grander backgrounds." By early afternoon, Emma found herself in need of fresh air. The day had warmed unusually for February, bright sunshine melting patches of snow and lending false promise of spring. Donning a wool cloak, she ventured into the gardens, following the crushed shell path that meandered through dormant rows, beds and sleeping perennial borders. The path eventually led to the lighthouse garden, a curious name for a place that contained no lighthouse. As Emma approached, she understood the moniker. The garden occupied a circular clearing at the edge of the cliff, surrounded by a low stone wall. In its center stood not a true lighthouse, but a whimsical garden structure built to resemble one in miniature, perhaps 12 feet tall, with a glass lantern room accessible by a spiral staircase. Emma pushed open the wrought iron gate, surprised, to find the little building unlocked. Inside, a single round room held a cushioned window seat that wrapped the circumference, offering views of the turbulent Atlantic below. Bookshelves built into the walls housed volumes protected from dust by glass doors. A small writing desk occupied one corner, still set with pen, ink and blank paper as if awaiting its owner's return. This was Caroline's sanctuary. Emma whirled, to find James standing in the doorway, his tall frame blocking the light. She hadn't heard his approach over the sound of waves crashing against the cliffs below. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I was exploring the grounds. I didn't mean to intrude." James stepped into the small tower, his presence immediately filling the space. He wore his business clothes, a dark frock coat and crisp white shirt, but had discarded his hat and gloves. "You aren't intruding," he said. "This is your home now." The simplicity of the statement hung between them, acknowledging the strangeness of their situation while affirming its reality. "It's a beautiful retreat," Emma offered, running her fingers along the spines of leather-bound books. "I can see why she loved it." James moved to the window seat, gazing out at the churning ocean. She called it her thinking tower, said the height gave her perspective. A half smile touched his lips, gone almost before it formed. "I had it built when Oliver was expected. Caroline suffered terribly with sickness in the early months. The house felt too confining, but she needed somewhere sheltered to rest outdoors. Emma settled on the window seat opposite him, maintaining a respectful distance. You must have loved her very much. James was silent for a long moment, his profile carved against the bright backdrop of sea and sky. I did, he finally said, though not always well. The admission surprised her.
How so?
His gaze remained fixed on the horizon. I was often absent. The shipping business expanded rapidly after we married. I spent months traveling, establishing new routes, securing contracts. His hands, strong, capable hands, clenched slightly, in his lap. When Caroline fell ill the final time, I was in Baltimore. I didn't reach her bedside until 3 days before the end. The pain in his voice was palpable, undiminished by the passage of time. She never blamed you, Emma said softly. When she spoke of you during our lessons, it was always with pride. James turned to her then, his eyes searching her face. Tell me about those lessons, about her as you knew her. Emma closed her eyes briefly, summoning memories of the elegant woman who had visited their modest apartment each Thursday afternoon, rain or shine. She came to us because she'd heard my father play at a charity concert, Emma began. She said his music moved her to tears, and she wanted to create something that could touch others the same way. She smiled faintly at the recollection. My father tried to direct her to younger teachers, more prestigious conservatory graduates, but she insisted on him, said she needed someone who understood music's heart, not just its mechanics. James nodded, a flicker of recognition passing across his face. That sounds like Caroline. She always saw beneath surfaces. She was determined, Emma continued. Even when her fingers cramped from practicing or when a particular chord progression eluded her, she wanted to create something lasting, something that expressed what words couldn't. She hesitated, then added, she spoke of you often, of how music filled the silence when conversation failed. James's expression darkened. We had grown distant before her illness. I was preoccupied with business. She with Oliver and her garden. We occupied the same house but lived increasingly separate lives. Yet she was creating music for you, Emma pointed out gently, a bridge back to what had been lost. His eyes met hers, storm grey and troubled. A bridge I never got to cross. After a moment, he added, Oliver said you began teaching him the piano today. Emma nodded, grateful for the shift in conversation. He has natural talent. His hands are small yet, but his ear is remarkably good. Like his mother, James murmured. Then with visible effort, he straightened and addressed her directly. I received your note this morning, requesting funds to have the piano tuned and the music room refreshed. Consider it approved. Whatever you need to fill this house with music again has my full support. Thank you, Emma said, surprised by the swift acquiescence. Oliver seemed to enjoy our first lesson very much. He spoke of nothing else at breakfast, James confirmed, something like wonder touching his features. 9 complete sentences. Mrs. Fitzgerald counted. The image, the stern housekeeper tallying a child's words like precious coins, brought an unexpected smile to Emma's lips. James saw it and remarkably returned it with a small one of his own. For a brief moment, the tension between them eased, replaced by shared understanding of what Oliver's progress meant. The moment shattered at the sound of approaching footsteps on the gravel path. James, are you out here? Victoria's voice preceded her appearance at the garden gate. She stopped abruptly at the sight of them sitting together in Caroline's retreat, her expression cycling rapidly from surprise to suspicion to carefully composed pleasantness. There you are, she said, pushing open the gate. I've been looking everywhere. Dr. Bennett has arrived for dinner, and that insufferable cook insists she needs to know how many places to set. Her gaze slid dismissively over Emma. I wasn't aware your wife would be joining us in Caroline's private space. The deliberate emphasis on wife and the territorial claim over the garden hung in the air like a challenge. Emma felt James tense beside her, but was unprepared for the firmness of his response. Emma is mistress of Windward Manor now, Victoria. All spaces are open to her. He rose, extending a hand to help Emma to her feet. As for dinner, please inform Mrs. Palmer that we'll be 5 at table. You, Dr. Bennet, Oliver, Emma, and myself. Victoria's carefully painted lips parted in surprise. Oliver, at the formal table, but he always takes supper in the nursery. He's 8 years old, James replied evenly. Old enough to join us, especially with his new mother present. The words, new mother, struck Emma like physical contact, warm and unexpected. Victoria looked as if she'd been slapped. I see, she said, her voice dangerously controlled. How? Progressive of you, James. Caroline always felt strongly about maintaining proper separation between adult conversation and childish prattle. But naturally, your new bride would have different ideas. Actually, Emma interjected quietly, I believe children benefit from adult conversation, properly guided. My father included me at his table from the time I could sit upright, even when distinguished musicians and composers were our guests. Victoria's eyes narrowed. Yes, well, different households have different standards, I suppose. Indeed they do, James agreed coolly. And this household's standards are now set by Emma and myself. He offered his arm to Emma in a gesture both courteous and pointed. Shall we return to the house? I find I've developed an appetite. Emma placed her hand on his forearm, feeling the tension in the muscles beneath fine wool. As they passed, Victoria at the garden gate, Emma caught the flash of genuine hurt beneath the woman's anger. The pain of being displaced, of watching her sister's legacy altered by unfamiliar hands. For a moment, Emma almost pitied her. Then she remembered Oliver's smile at the piano, the way his small fingers had coaxed life from ivory keys silent too long. Some changes, however painful to witness, were necessary for healing to begin. Dinner. That evening became a subtle battlefield, with Victoria and Emma maneuvering for position, while Dr. Bennet, a genial man in his 50s with kind eyes and an observant nature, acted as unwitting buffer. Oliver, seated between Emma and his father, maintained a wide-eyed silence at finding himself included in the adult gathering. I understand congratulations are in order, Dr. Bennet said as the soup course was served. Though I must say, James, you kept your intentions remarkably quiet. Half the town is still recovering from the shock. James, at the head of the table, merely inclined his head. Emma and I preferred a private ceremony. Private indeed, Victoria murmured into her wineglass. One might almost say secretive. Not secretive, Emma corrected gently, simply personal. Dr. Bennet smiled at her warmly. Well, however it came about, it's a pleasure to see some life returning to Windward Manor, and young Oliver here looks particularly well this evening. He addressed the boy directly. Your father tells me you've begun piano lessons with your new mother. Oliver nodded solemnly. I can play 5 notes in a row, he said, holding up his hand to demonstrate. And Mama Emma says my fingers are clever. The casual use of Mama Emma caused Victoria to set down her spoon with excessive care. Oliver, darling, don't you think your real mother would be hurt to hear you call someone else by her title? James's hand tightened on his wineglass, but before he could speak, Oliver responded with unexpected clarity. My real mother is in heaven, he said matter-of-factly. She can see everything from there. Papa said so she can see that Mama Emma is teaching me her song, and that makes it okay. Victoria opened her mouth, then closed it, for once rendered speechless. Dr. Bennet's eyes crinkled with suppressed amusement, while James regarded his son with undisguised pride. "Very logically reasoned, Oliver," he said. "Your mother would indeed be pleased that you're learning music." The conversation shifted to safer topics as the main course arrived. Recent town developments, Dr. Bennet's new treatment for rheumatism, the unseasonably mild weather. Throughout the meal, Emma noticed James watching her interactions with Oliver, the way she gently corrected his table manners, encouraged him to try unfamiliar foods, and included him in conversation at a level he could understand. By the time dessert was served, a delicate apple tart with cinnamon cream, Oliver was yawning behind his hand, the excitement of the day catching up with him. "I believe it's past someone's bedtime," Emma said, smiling at his half-hearted protest. "I'll take him up," James offered, rising from his chair. "Dr. Bennet, Victoria, please excuse me for a few minutes." As father and son left the dining room, Victoria immediately turned to Emma, her expression calculating. "How convenient that you happen to possess exactly the skills to ingratiate yourself with both father and son," she said, voice pitched low so the hovering footman couldn't hear. "Almost as if you planned it." Emma maintained her composure, sipping her after-dinner tea with deliberate calm. "I assure you, Mrs. Harrington, I had no plans beyond honoring my father's dying wish." Dr. Bennet, evidently sensing tension, cleared his throat. "I must say, Mrs. Montgomery, your influence already seems beneficial. I haven't heard Oliver speak so freely since before his mother's passing." Victoria's smile tightened. "Yes. Well, novelty often produces temporary effects. One mustn't mistake initial excitement for lasting improvement." "On the contrary," the doctor replied thoughtfully, "in my experience, children are remarkably honest barometers of authenticity. They respond to genuine care, not performance." He smiled kindly at Emma. "And I suspect our new Mrs. Montgomery possesses genuine care in abundance." Victoria set down her dessert fork with a sharp click against fine china. "If you'll excuse me, I find I have a headache developing. Dr. Bennet, perhaps you might recommend something before it worsens." As the doctor followed Victoria from the room, offering sympathetic murmurs about barometric pressure and nervous tension, Emma found herself momentarily alone in the grand dining room. Crystal glittered in candlelight, silver gleamed on damask, and everywhere the weight of tradition pressed against innovation, old wealth confronting new ideas. She took a deep breath, steadying herself against the tide of changes she had set in motion, willingly or not. James found her there minutes later, still seated at the massive table that could have accommodated 20, but tonight had held only 5. "Oliver asked for you," he said from the doorway. "He wants you to play for him before he sleeps." Emma rose immediately. "Of course." As they ascended the grand staircase together, James added, "He's never asked for a bedtime ritual before. Not since Caroline." The unfinished sentence hung between them, heavy with implication. "Children need constancy," Emma said softly. "Patterns they can rely upon, especially after loss." James glanced at her, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. "You speak from experience." She nodded, remembering the disorienting months after her mother's death, followed too quickly by her father's decline. When everything shifts beneath you, small certainties become anchors. They reached Oliver's room, a spacious chamber, decorated in nautical themes, with model ships displayed on shelves and maps framed on walls. The boy was already in bed, propped against pillows, his hair damp from washing and his eyes heavy-lidded but determined to remain open. "You came," he said, satisfaction evident in his voice. "Of course I did," Emma replied, moving to sit on the edge of his bed. "What would you like to hear?" "Mother's song," he answered immediately. "The lullaby." Emma glanced around, noticing for the first time a small, upright piano in the corner of the nursery. "Is that where she played for you?" Oliver nodded. "Every night. Before." James remained by the door, his posture rigid as Emma crossed to the instrument. She opened it carefully, finding the keys yellowed, but the actions still responsive. A thin film of dust spoke of years of disuse. The lullaby emerged softly, sweetly, filling the room with gentle notes that seemed to soften its sharp corners. Emma played it through once, then again, adding subtle embellishments that rounded the melody like river stones smoothed by current. When she turned after the third repetition, Oliver's eyes had closed, his breathing deep and even. James stood, exactly where she had left him, but something in his expression had altered. A guardedness replaced by vulnerability, so raw it almost hurt to witness. Without speaking, he gestured for her to precede him from the room. In the hallway, lit only by wall sconces that cast long shadows, James stopped before reaching the landing. "Thank you," he said, his voice low and rough-edged, "for what you did tonight." Emma shook her head slightly. "I only played a song." "No," he countered. "You gave him back something I couldn't, a piece of his mother, transformed into something he can hold on to." He hesitated, then added, "You gave me something as well." "What's that?" she asked softly. James looked down the darkened hallway toward his son's room. The chance to hear her music without drowning in grief, to remember her with something other than pain. His eyes, when they returned to Emma's face, held the first genuine warmth she had seen in them. It's no small gift. Before she could respond, he reached out and took her hand, not formally as he had the previous evening, but with genuine connection, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in a gesture that might have been accidental but felt deliberate. "Good night, Emma," he said, her name sounding different on his lips this time, not a title or role, but a recognition of the person behind it. "Good night, James," she replied, the name still unfamiliar on her tongue but less foreign than before. He released her hand slowly, as if reluctant to break the momentary connection. Then, with a slight inclination of his head, he turned toward his own chambers at the far end of the corridor. Emma watched him go, aware of something shifting between them. Thin ice beginning to thaw after the longest freeze, revealing hints of what might flow beneath. The next weeks unfolded in tentative rhythm, days bleeding into one another like watercolors on damp paper. February surrendered to March with reluctant grace, bringing with it capricious weather that alternated between winter's final gasps and spring's earliest promises. Within Windward Manor, similar transformations occurred. Subtle shifts in atmosphere, in routine, in the spaces between people. Emma rose each morning before dawn, using the quiet hours to familiarize herself with the complexities of her new position. She studied the household accounts by lamplight, memorized the names and positions of staff members, and made careful notes about estate matters requiring attention. By the time the household stirred, she had already accomplished more than most. Would manage in a full day. Oliver's piano lessons became the fixed point around which other activities revolved. Every morning after his academic studies, the boy would appear in the music room, face alight with anticipation. Under Emma's patient guidance, his progress was remarkable, not simply in technique, but in confidence. Notes that had once emerged, hesitantly, now flowed with purpose. His small hands, once awkward on the keys, began to move with increasing certainty. "Like this?" he would ask, demonstrating a new fingering pattern Emma had taught him. "Precisely like that," she would answer, rewarding his efforts with genuine praise. The boy flourished under her attention, gradually shedding the silence that had gripped him since his mother's death. He began to speak at meals, to ask questions, to occasionally laugh with the bright, unself-conscious joy of childhood. Each New expression was a victory, each complete sentence a treasure that Emma stored away in her heart. James observed these changes with cautious optimism. Though business frequently took him to his offices in town, he made a point of returning for dinner each evening, listening attentively as Oliver recounted his day's accomplishments. The formality that had characterized their early interactions gradually eased, replaced by something not quite comfortable but no longer strained. It was Victoria who remained immovable, a jagged rock against which new currents broke uselessly. Her visit, originally intended for a week, extended without clear endpoint. She maintained a careful veneer of civility in James's presence, but made no effort to disguise her disdain when alone with Emma. "The servants tell me you've been redecorating Caroline's morning room," she remarked one afternoon, finding Emma arranging fresh flowers in the bright chamber overlooking the east. "Gardens. How industrious of you to remake the house so quickly." "How industrious of you to remake the house so quickly." Emma continued her task, trimming stems with steady hands. Hardly redecorating. The curtains needed laundering and the upholstery freshening, nothing more. Victoria trailed manicured, fingers across a side table inspecting for dust. Caroline chose that particular shade of blue, had the fabric imported from Paris. "It's lovely," Emma agreed. "I've simply ensured it can be properly seen through clean windows." Victoria's smile tightened. Such domestic talents. One wonders where a music teacher's daughter acquired them. Emma met her gaze directly, refusing to be baited. "Necessity is an excellent teacher, Mrs. Harrington. When one has no servants, one learns to manage for oneself." "How resourceful," Victoria murmured, the words dripping condescension. She moved to the window, looking out toward the lighthouse garden. "I notice you've been spending time in Caroline's retreat as well." Emma placed the last stem, a fragrant narcissus, one of the first spring blooms, into the arrangement. "James has encouraged me to use all the estate's amenities." "James," Victoria repeated, turning back with narrowed eyes. Such rapid familiarity. "Tell me, does he encourage other intimacies as well?" The implication hung in the air, deliberately. Crude. Emma felt heat rise to her cheeks, but kept her voice steady. "My relationship with my husband is not a subject for discussion, Mrs. Harrington, not even with you." Victoria's laugh held no humor. "Husband. Such a grand title for what amounts to a business arrangement." She moved closer, lowering her voice though no one else was present. "Do you imagine he married you for anything beyond Oliver's convenience? That he sees you as anything but a serviceable replacement, a functional piece to fill the gap Caroline left?" The words struck with precision, finding the very doubts Emma fought to silence in her darker moments. Still, she refused to show their impact. "Whether you believe it or not," she said quietly, "I want only what's best for Oliver and James. As, I presume, do you." Victoria studied her with cold calculation. "What would be best is for you to remember your place, not the one you've schemed your way into, but the one you were born to. Sooner or later, James will realize his mistake. The question is merely how much damage you'll do before then." With that parting shot, she swept from the room, leaving behind only the cloying scent of expensive perfume and the echo of insecurities Emma had hoped to outrun. Alone, Emma sank into a chair, her composure momentarily fracturing. Victoria's words had found their mark because they echoed her own midnight fears, that she was unsuitable, unworthy, a temporary solution rather than a lasting choice. Though James had shown her increasing kindness, there remained between them a careful distance, an unspoken acknowledgement of their unusual arrangement. They had not shared a bed. James maintained his quarters at the opposite end of the family wing, retreating there each night after bidding her a formal good night. Sometimes Emma caught him looking at her with an expression that hinted at deeper feelings, but always he withdrew before she could be certain. "You're being foolish," she whispered to herself, straightening her shoulders. "You knew what this marriage was when you accepted it." Rising, she crossed to the window Victoria had abandoned, gazing out at the estate spreading before her like an unfamiliar country she was expected to govern. Beyond the manicured gardens lay the wilder coastline, where waves perpetually reshaped, the shore carving away the old to make room for the new. Perhaps change here required similar patience, the steady pressure of constant effort rather than sudden upheaval. With renewed determination, Emma returned to her duties. If she could not yet claim James's heart, she could at least earn his respect through diligent stewardship of his home and careful nurturing of his son. That evening, after Oliver had been tucked into bed with a new lullaby Emma had composed, especially for him, she found herself drawn once more to the music room. The house had settled into nighttime stillness. Most servants retired to their quarters, James secluded in his study with business correspondence. She moved through the silent corridors like a ghost, trailing fingertips along paneled walls that had witnessed generations of Montgomery joys and sorrows. The music room welcomed her with familiar warmth. Without lighting more than a single lamp, Emma settled at the piano, allowing her fingers to find the keys by touch and memory. She began to play, not Caroline's lullaby, not classical pieces from her conservatory training, but something altogether new. Notes emerged tentatively at first, then with increasing confidence, blending into a melody that spoke of longing and hope in equal measure. Emma lost herself in the composition, eyes closed, body swaying slightly with the rhythm. The piece was still forming, rough-edged in places, but its heart beat strong and true, a musical articulation of emotions she dared not voice aloud. When the final chord faded, she remained motionless, hands hovering above the keys, unwilling to break the spell. "That was beautiful." James's voice came from the doorway, quiet but clear in the hushed room. "I've never heard it before." Emma turned, startled. James stood leaning against the doorframe, jacket discarded, waistcoat unbuttoned, cravat loosened, a rare glimpse of the man beneath the formal exterior. "You wouldn't have," she said softly. "I was composing." He entered the room fully then, moving to stand beside the piano. "You create your own music as well as play others." Emma nodded, suddenly self-conscious. "My father encouraged it. He said interpretation was valuable, but creation was divine." "Your father sounds like a wise man," James observed, his gaze thoughtful. "He was," Emma agreed. Memories of her father, tall and thin, perpetually dusted with chalk from the conservatory classrooms, momentarily overwhelming her. Music was his religion. He worshipped at the altar of Bach and Mozart, but believed every human carried their own unique melody inside them. "And yours?" James asked, gesturing toward the piano. "What does your melody say?" The question seemed to hang in the air between them, weighted with meaning beyond its simple words. Emma's fingers traced the edge of the keyboard, buying time, while she considered her response. "That beauty can grow in unlikely places," she finally answered. "That what seems broken may simply be unfinished." James's expression softened, the stern lines of his face relaxing into something almost vulnerable, like a winter garden waiting for spring. "Yes," she whispered, surprised and touched by his understanding. "Exactly like that." He moved closer, perching on the edge of the piano bench beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance, yet undeniably present. The proximity sent a shiver of awareness through Emma's body, a recognition of him not as employer or benefactor, but as a man, complex, wounded, yet still capable of growth. "Oliver asked me something tonight," James said, gaze fixed on the piano keys. "Something that's made me realize how selfish I've been." "Selfish?" Emma echoed, confused. How so? James sighed, one hand absently tracing the curve of the piano's polished wood. He asked if you would always be his mother now, or if you might leave as others have. He's worried, Emma. Worried that what he's coming to depend upon might be temporary. Emotion tightened Emma's throat. What did you tell him? That you were his mother in all the ways that matter, and that you wouldn't leave him. James finally looked up, meeting her eyes directly. But then I realized I've given you no real security, no true place here. I've asked you to be his mother, to be my wife in name while keeping you at arm's length. You've been generous, Emma protested gently, more than fair in your treatment of me. Fair? James repeated, a note of self-derision in his voice. Is that what we should aspire to between us? Fairness? The question hung between them, layered with implications neither had yet dared voice. Emma's heart quickened, but she kept her voice steady. What should we aspire to, then? James stood abruptly, moving to the window where moonlight silvered his profile. For a long moment, he was silent, shoulders tense beneath fine linen. When he finally spoke, his voice had roughened. I don't know, he admitted. I've spent 3 years existing rather than living, Emma. Grief becomes a companion of sorts, predictable, familiar. It asks nothing but that you remain faithful to it. He turned back to face her. But these past weeks, watching you with Oliver, seeing how you've brought life back into these rooms, I find myself wanting more than mere existence. Emma remained at the piano, afraid to move, to break whatever tenuous understanding was, forming between them. What do you want, James? He crossed the room in 3 strides, kneeling before her so their eyes were level. To try, he said simply. To see if what began as arrangement might grow into something more genuine, something Oliver could believe in without reservation. Hope fluttered in Emma's chest, fragile as a newly hatched butterfly. And if it cannot, then we will remain as we are, partners in Oliver's care, companions of a sort. His hand moved, as if to touch her, then hesitated. But I suspect there's more between us than either of us anticipated. I've seen how you look at me when you think I'm unaware. I've felt myself drawn to you in ways I believed impossible after Caroline. The confession, offered with such vulnerable honesty, undid Emma's careful composure. Tears gathered in her, eyes not of sadness but of bewildered joy. I never expected this, she whispered, never thought to find a place where I might truly belong. This time James did touch her, a gentle brush of fingers against her cheek, capturing a tear before it could fall. Nor did I expect to find someone who could heal what was broken in this house, in my son, perhaps even in me. The moment stretched between them, taut with possibility. Then, with deliberate care, James leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers, not the perfunctory kiss of their wedding ceremony, but something genuine, a question being asked and tentatively answered. Emma responded with gentle pressure, her hands rising to rest lightly on his shoulders. When they parted, James remained close, his forehead nearly touching hers. We begin again, he murmured, not as master and servant, not as widower and replacement, but as 2 people discovering each other anew. Emma nodded, unable to speak past the emotion constricting her throat. In that moment, Victoria's cruel insinuations seemed distant, irrelevant. Whatever had brought them together, convenience, chance, or fate, mattered less than what they might build from this fragile beginning. James rose, offering his hand to help her stand. It's late, he said softly. May I escort you to your room? The traditional courtesy took on new meaning, an acknowledgement of boundaries still to be respected, of a relationship to be nurtured rather than rushed. Emma placed her hand in his, allowing him to lead her from the music room and up the grand staircase. Outside her chamber door, James paused. "Sleep well, Emma," he said, brushing his lips against her knuckles in a gesture at once courtly and intimate. "And you," she replied, reluctant to break the connection, but understanding the wisdom in patience. As her door closed between them, Emma pressed her fingers to her lips, still warm from his kiss. For the first time since arriving at Windward Manor, she felt not like an interloper, but like a woman exactly where she was meant to be. Dawn arrived with a dramatic flourish the next morning, painting the sky in sweeping watercolor strokes of rose and amber. Emma woke earlier than usual, sleep having proven elusive after the previous evening's revelations. She dressed quickly in a simple morning gown of dove grey, practical yet becoming, and made her way downstairs, hoping to enjoy the sunrise from the conservatory's eastern windows. The house was still wrapped in pre-dawn quiet, most servants not yet risen to begin their daily duties. Emma moved through the corridors with familiar ease, no longer feeling like a stranger navigating unknown territory. As she passed the library, however, a flicker of movement caught her eye. Lamplight where there should be none at this hour. Pausing, she heard low voices engaged in urgent conversation. One was unmistakably Victoria's, her cultured tones sharpened by agitation. The other, male and unfamiliar, responded in hushed agreement. Emma hesitated, torn between discretion and curiosity. Then Victoria's next words, suddenly raised in emphasis, froze her in place. Must be dealt with before she secures her position completely. James is already softening toward her. I saw them last night in the music room, looking entirely too comfortable together. Patience, Victoria, the male voice counseled. Rush this, and you risk alienating your brother-in-law entirely. The girl may hang herself given enough rope. We don't have the luxury of patience, Victoria hissed. Oliver is growing attached to her. Once that bond solidifies, James will never send her away, regardless of what we reveal. Then perhaps we should accelerate our inquiries in Boston, the man suggested. My associate has already spoken with several people who knew Professor Wilson. There are inconsistencies in her story, Victoria. Given time, we'll find the proof we need. Emma's blood ran cold. They were investigating her past, seeking ammunition to discredit her. But what inconsistencies could they possibly find? Her account of her father, of Caroline's lessons, had been entirely truthful. Time is precisely what we lack, Victoria insisted. Every day she grows more entrenched. Did you know she's been reviewing the estate accounts, making changes to household procedures? The servants are beginning to look to her for direction rather than consulting me as they always have. Because you're a frequent visitor, not the mistress of the house, the man pointed out reasonably. Legally, she holds that position now, a position she schemed her way into. Victoria's voice rose dangerously before dropping again to a furious whisper. We both know this marriage is a farce. A servant girl doesn't rise to mistress of Windward Manor through honest means. Keep your voice down, the man cautioned. Walls have ears, especially in old houses. Taking that as her cue to retreat, Emma backed away silently, heart pounding. She had nearly reached the end of the corridor when the library door opened, spilling lamplight into the hallway. Instinctively, she pressed herself into an alcove, concealed by heavy drapes and pre-dawn shadows. The man who emerged alongside, Victoria, was familiar. Dr. Bennett, the family physician who had dined with them weeks ago. His expression now was far from the genial benevolence he had shown at dinner. Calculating eyes scanned the corridor as if sensing a presence, while one hand rested possessively at Victoria's back. I'll make further inquiries today, he murmured to Victoria. In the meantime, continue as planned. James trusts you as family. Use that to plant doubts about her motives, her background. Victoria nodded, her face set in determined lines. Caroline would be horrified to see some orphaned fortune hunter taking her place, influencing her son. I won't allow it to continue, Thomas. I simply won't. And it won't, he assured her, brushing his lips against her temple in a gesture, suggesting far greater intimacy than family friendship. But we must be strategic. The Montgomery fortune is worth patience. They moved past Emma's hiding place without detecting her presence, heading toward the morning room where Victoria sometimes took early tea. When their footsteps faded, Emma emerged from the alcove, trembling with shock and indignation. The conversation revealed not just enmity, but conspiracy. Victoria and Dr. Bennet working in tandem to undermine her position, motivated by some interest in the Montgomery fortune. The implications were staggering. How long had they been plotting? What evidence did they hope to manufacture against her? More pressingly, should she tell James immediately or gather more information first? The wrong approach could backfire spectacularly. Without proof, it would be her word against two respected individuals with long-standing connections to his family. Lost in troubled thoughts, Emma continued to the conservatory, barely registering the spectacular sunrise now painting the sky. Beyond the glass, she sank onto a bench, surrounded by fragrant citrus trees, mind racing through possibilities and dangers. "You're up early," James's voice startled her from her reverie. He stood in the doorway, already dressed for business, but lacking his usual formal reserve. His smile faded as he registered her expression. "What's wrong? You look pale." Emma hesitated, weighing her options quickly. "I overheard something concerning," she finally said, deciding honesty without full disclosure was her safest course for now. Victoria was speaking with Dr. Bennet in the library just now. Their conversation suggested they disapprove of our marriage more actively than I realized. James frowned, moving to sit beside her. Victoria's disapproval is hardly news. She worshipped Caroline and resents any change at Windward Manor. "This seemed different," Emma said carefully. "More coordinated. They mentioned making inquiries in Boston, investigating my background." A flash of anger crossed James's face. "They have no right," he said flatly. "What you shared with me about your father, about Caroline's lessons, that's private, not subject to their scrutiny." Emma touched his arm lightly. "I have nothing to hide, James. My father was exactly who I said, a respected professor before illness reduced him to private teaching. Caroline did come to us for lessons, but their tone suggested they hoped to find something damaging, something that might change your opinion of me." James covered her hand with his own, his touch warm and reassuring. "My opinion of you is based on what I've seen with my own eyes, your kindness to my son, your respectful management of my home, your extraordinary musical gifts. Nothing Victoria unearths from your past could alter that." The absolute certainty in his voice steadied Emma's racing heart. "Thank you for that," she said softly. "Still, I worry about their intentions." "As well you might," James agreed, his expression hardening. "Victoria has always been possessive of Caroline's memory, but this goes beyond grief into interference. And Bennet..." He paused, brow furrowing. "I've known Thomas since boyhood. He attended Caroline during her final illness. I considered him a friend." "Could he have financial motivations?" Emma suggested delicately. "They mentioned the Montgomery fortune." James's mouth tightened. "Bennet's practice has struggled in recent years, too much competition from younger doctors in Portsmouth, and Victoria, for all her family connections, was left with relatively little after her husband's investments failed." He shook his head, pieces visibly connecting in his mind. "I've been blind to much, it seems, while wrapped in my own grief." Emma squeezed his hand gently. "Grief has its own demands. It leaves little room for suspicion of those we trust. Now, perhaps he acknowledged, but that time has passed. With sudden decisiveness he stood, pulling Emma to her feet alongside him. I won't confront them yet. Better to observe, to catch them in their schemes rather than drive them underground with premature accusations. What should I do? Emma asked, relieved to have shared even part of her burden. James's eyes softened as they met hers. Continue as you have been. Be the extraordinary woman who has awakened this household from its long winter. Let them underestimate you. A smile touched his lips, and trust that you are no longer alone in facing whatever storm they brew. The simple declaration, you are no longer alone, washed through Emma like sunlight through stained glass, illuminating dark corners long shadowed by solitary struggle. Impulsively, she rose on tiptoe and pressed a kiss to his cheek, surprising them both with the gesture's natural intimacy. Nor are you alone, she whispered, in whatever comes next. James's hand rose to cup her face, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheek with tender precision. For a moment, Emma thought he might kiss her properly, there amidst the orange blossoms and morning light. Instead, he sighed, reluctance evident in his eyes. I must go to town today, shipping contracts that can't be postponed, but I'll return by dinner. His expression grew serious. Be careful, Emma. Victoria is more dangerous than her refined exterior suggests. I've survived worse than Victoria Harrington, Emma replied with quiet confidence. My father's illness taught me resilience. Poverty taught me resourcefulness. I won't be easily intimidated. Pride flickered across James's face. I believe that entirely. He lifted her hand to his lips, a gesture becoming familiar yet never routine. Until tonight, then. Emma watched him go, drawing strength from his evident faith in her. Whatever Victoria and Dr. Bennet were planning, they would face not a vulnerable servant girl, but Mrs. Montgomery of Windward Manor, a woman who had found her voice, her place, and perhaps even her heart's home. The day stretched before Emma like contested territory, each hour a small battle to be won. With James gone to town and Victoria alert for weaknesses, she felt exposed, yet determined to stand her ground. After breakfast, during which Victoria had watched her with the calculating patience of a cat at a mouse hole, Emma retreated to the safety of the music room for Oliver's morning lesson. The boy arrived promptly at 10, clutching a leather-bound notebook Emma had given him for musical notations. His progress over the past weeks had been remarkable, his natural affinity for music blossoming under her guidance. Today, however, he seemed distracted, his usual eager concentration replaced by fidgeting hands and wandering eyes. Is something troubling you? Emma asked gently as he fumbled through a simple exercise for the third time. Oliver glanced toward the door, as if checking for eavesdroppers, then leaned closer. Aunt Victoria told Mrs. Fitzgerald that you might be going away soon, he whispered, voice tight with anxiety. She said you weren't really meant to stay. The revelation struck Emma like a physical blow. Victoria had wasted no time implementing her campaign, targeting not just the household staff, but Oliver himself, the cruelest possible approach. Oliver, Emma said firmly, taking his small hands in hers, listen to me carefully. I'm not going anywhere. Your father and I have discussed this explicitly. My home is here now, with you. Promise? He asked, brown eyes wide with the desperate hope of a child who had already lost too much. I promise, Emma affirmed, squeezing his fingers gently. Nothing Victoria says can change that. Relief softened his features momentarily, then doubt crept back in. But Aunt Victoria said you and Father barely know each other, that real marriage needs love, and you don't. The adult world is complicated, Emma interrupted, choosing her words with care. Your father and I came together in an unusual way, that's true. But what's growing between us is genuine, Oliver, and what I feel for you has been real from the beginning. The boy considered this, head tilted in serious contemplation. Like how seeds look different from flowers, but they're still the right thing, just not finished growing. Emma smiled, touched by his perfect metaphor. Exactly like that. Very insightful, Oliver. He shrugged, embarrassment coloring his cheeks. At the praise. Mother used to say that about her garden, that we mustn't judge what's still becoming. Something warm and protective unfurled in Emma's chest at this glimpse of Caroline's wisdom living on in her son. Your mother sounds like she was very wise. Oliver nodded solemnly. She was. But she also said music matters more than talking. Sometimes. He repositioned his hands on the keyboard. Can I try that exercise again? I think I can do it right now. The simple determination in his voice, the resilience children somehow manage despite adults' complications, filled Emma with renewed resolve. If Oliver could face his fears and try again, so could she. The lesson concluded successfully, with Oliver mastering not only the troublesome exercise, but beginning work on a simple duet they would play together at the small musical evening Emma had proposed for the following week. As he gathered his notebook, preparing to join Mr. Collins for history lessons, Oliver fixed Emma with an earnest gaze. I told Aunt Victoria she was wrong about you, he announced. I said you were teaching me Mother's song, and that means you belong here. Before Emma could respond to this startling declaration, he darted forward, wrapped his arms briefly around her waist in a quick, fierce hug, then raced from the room, leaving her blinking back tears. The exchange left Emma both heartened and troubled. Oliver's trust was a precious gift, but Victoria's manipulation of his fears crossed a boundary that awakened a protective anger Emma hadn't known herself capable of feeling. It was one thing to investigate her background or undermine her with the staff, but quite another to deliberately distress a child already scarred by loss. Resolving to address the matter directly, Emma sought Victoria throughout the morning, only to learn from Mrs. Fitzgerald that she had gone to town, ostensibly to visit the modiste, but likely to confer further with Dr. Bennet. The temporary reprieve allowed Emma to focus on household matters, including finalizing preparations for the small musical gathering she had organized. The event, modest in scale but significant in meaning, would be the first social occasion at Windward Manor since Caroline's death. Just 12 guests had been invited, neighboring families of good standing but not high fashion. People who had known James before grief transformed him into a recluse. Emma had consulted him carefully about each invitation, sensitive to the delicate balance between moving forward and honoring what had been lost. Mrs. Fitzgerald proved an unexpected ally in these preparations, her initial reserve having mellowed into cautious approval as she observed Emma's genuine care for both house and family. It'll do this place good to hear voices again, the housekeeper remarked as they reviewed the supper menu for the gathering. Been too long since these walls. Heard laughter. Emma smiled, grateful for the woman's support. I hope we strike the right tone. I don't wish to seem insensitive to what came before. Mrs. Fitzgerald's weathered face softened. Life moves on, Mrs. Montgomery. Standing still serves no one, least of all those we've lost. She hesitated, then added quietly, the mistress, Caroline. She wouldn't have wanted this house frozen in amber after she passed, not with a young boy growing up in it. The simple validation eased a weight Emma hadn't realized she carried. Thank you for that, Mrs. Fitzgerald. It means a great deal coming from someone who knew her. The housekeeper nodded briskly, returning to practical matters. Now, about the flowers for the dining room. The hothouse has some decent spring blooms, but nothing like what we'd have in May. They continued planning. the conversation flowing easily between mistress and housekeeper, two women united in their commitment to nurturing the life beginning to reawaken within Windward Manor's walls. By late afternoon, Emma found herself drawn once more to the lighthouse garden, seeking moments of solitude to order her thoughts before James's return. The day had warmed considerably, allowing her to leave her shawl behind as she followed the familiar path to Caroline's retreat. The garden had begun its springtime transformation, early crocuses pushing through soil still cold from winter, buds forming on weathered branches. Emma had taken to spending time here, initially drawn by curiosity about the woman whose place she had ostensibly taken, now finding genuine peace in the thoughtfully designed space. She entered the small tower, breathing in the peculiar mixture of salt air and old books that characterized the interior. Selecting a volume of poetry from the shelves, one whose pages showed signs of frequent handling, suggesting Caroline's preference, Emma settled onto the window seat that offered views of both garden and distant sea. The book fell open naturally to a page marked with a pressed flower, a forget-me-not. Its blue faded to ghostly grey, but its form still perfect. Beside it, in elegant handwriting, Emma recognized from the lullaby notation Caroline had written, a simple observation: the sea teaches patience, the garden teaches hope. Both remind us nothing truly ends, it only changes form. The words resonated with unexpected force, as if Caroline herself had reached across time to offer guidance. Emma traced the faded ink with gentle fingers, feeling not jealousy or inadequacy, but a strange sense of connection to the woman who had loved this family first. "I promised to care for them," she whispered to the empty air. "To help them heal, to honor your memory, while allowing them to live again." The moment of quiet communion was shattered by the sound of approaching footsteps on the gravel path. Too light for James's stride, too purposeful for a servant's hesitant approach. Emma closed the book carefully, returning it to its place on the shelf as Victoria appeared in the doorway. She had clearly just returned from town, still wearing her fashionable visiting ensemble of deep burgundy, accented with jet beading that caught the afternoon light. Her expression, upon finding Emma in Caroline's retreat, shifted rapidly from surprise to cold anger. "Making yourself comfortable in my sister's private sanctuary, I see," she observed, removing her gloves with deliberate precision. "How very presumptuous." Emma remained seated, refusing to be intimidated. "James has encouraged me to use all the estate's spaces. Caroline created beauty here. It seems a poor tribute to let it fall into neglect." Victoria stepped inside, her presence immediately filling the small tower with tension. "And you fancy yourself the appropriate caretaker of her legacy? A girl who appeared from nowhere with convenient stories about music lessons and deathbed promises." The direct attack confirmed Emma's suspicions about Victoria's trip to town. She had been gathering ammunition, likely with Dr. Bennett's assistance. "My history is exactly as I've presented it," Emma said evenly. "My father taught Caroline. She composed music for her family. These are simple facts, not elaborate fabrications." Victoria's smile held no warmth. "Facts should be verifiable, shouldn't they?" Yet when Dr. Bennett inquired at the Boston Conservatory, no one recalled a Professor Wilson matching your description. Curious, isn't it? Emma's heart stuttered, then steadied. She had anticipated this particular attack. "My father taught at the conservatory for only 3 years before his health failed. That was over a decade ago, when the institution was still in its early years. After that, he taught privately from our home on Marlborough Street." "Yes, Marlborough Street," Victoria repeated, triumph flashing in her eyes. "Except no record exists of a Wilson family at the address you provided. No lease, no property deed, more curiosities. The revelation genuinely surprised Emma. That's impossible. We lived there for 8 years until Father's death. Victoria moved closer, her perfume, heavy and oppressive compared to the garden's natural fragrance, surrounding them both. What's impossible is your entire story. You've crafted a convenient narrative to insinuate yourself into this household, to lay claim to fortunes and position far beyond your station. But fabrications inevitably unravel, Miss Wilson. Threads come loose. Mrs. Montgomery, Emma corrected firmly, rising to face Victoria directly. Whatever you believe about my past, my present is clear. I am James's wife and Oliver's stepmother. I have made no claims on Montgomery wealth beyond what my husband has freely offered. Victoria's laugh held genuine amusement. Oh, you are. Persistent, I'll grant you that. But you've overreached. When James learns the extent of your deception, the calculated manipulation of his grief and Oliver's vulnerability, your brief tenure as Mrs. Montgomery will end as abruptly as it began. Though inwardly shaken by the unexpected challenges to details she knew to be true, Emma maintained her composure. If you're so confident in your accusations, why the secrecy? Why not present your findings directly to James? All in good time, Victoria replied, adjusting her sleeve with meticulous care. Thomas, Dr. Bennett believes we should gather irrefutable evidence before approaching James. He has a curious blind spot where you're concerned. The casual mention of the doctor by his first name confirmed another of Emma's suspicions, that their relationship extended beyond family friendship into something more intimate, perhaps more financially motivated. Do you imagine James will thank you for this intervention? Emma asked quietly. For undermining his decisions, for distressing his son with suggestions that I might suddenly vanish. Victoria's expression hardened. How dare you? Oliver told me what you said to Mrs. Fitzgerald, Emma interrupted, anger finally coloring her tone. You deliberately planted seeds of fear in a child who has already lost too much. Whatever your opinion of me, that was unconscionably cruel. For a brief moment, something like shame flickered across Victoria's features before being subsumed by renewed determination. Children are remarkably resilient. Better a temporary discomfort now than allowing him to form deeper attachments to someone with no rightful place in his life. My place is the one James has given me, Emma stated firmly. Question my background if you must, investigate my past if it satisfies your suspicions, but do not ever use Oliver as a weapon in whatever war you're waging. The two women faced each other in taut silence, the small tower suddenly insufficient to contain the force of their opposing wills. It was Victoria who finally stepped back, though her retreat seemed tactical rather than defeated. This conversation has been most illuminating, she said, her cultured voice restored to its usual cool precision. We shall see what James makes of your passionate defense. With that parting shot, she turned and exited the tower, leaving Emma alone once more with the whisper of waves against distant cliffs and the unsettling awareness that her past, which she had believed straightforward and verifiable, had somehow been rendered suspect through Victoria's machinations. The discrepancies troubled her deeply. The Marlborough Street address had been their home. She could still picture every crack in the ceiling, every worn spot on the stair carpet. How could records of their tenancy have vanished? And the conservatory? True, her father's tenure had been brief and long ago, but surely some institutional memory remained. Unsettled but resolute, Emma made her way back to the main house. She would tell James everything when he returned. Victoria's accusations, the supposed inconsistencies, her own confusion about how documented facts of her life could have been erased or altered. Whatever trap Victoria and Dr. Bennett were laying, transparency offered the surest defense. The house hummed with early evening activity when she entered, footmen lighting lamps, maids turning down beds, kitchen staff preparing dinner. Emma moved through it all with outward calm that belied her inner turmoil. In her chambers, she changed for dinner with particular care, selecting a gown of deep blue that James had once commented suited her coloring. Her hands trembled slightly. As she fastened Caroline's locket around her neck, the small weight a reminder of her purpose beyond whatever personal happiness she might find at Windward Manor. As she descended the main staircase, Emma was surprised to see unusual activity in the entrance hall. A footman taking a gentleman's hat and coat, Mrs. Fitzgerald directing a maid to add another place setting for dinner. The visitor's voice, cultured and authoritative, carried clearly as he thanked the servants for their attention. "Not at all, Mr. Blackwood," Mrs. Fitzgerald replied. "The master will be pleased you were able to accept his invitation on such short notice." Emma paused midway down the stairs, momentarily startled. James had mentioned no dinner guest, nor had the household been prepared for one. She composed herself quickly, continuing her descent with the dignity expected of the mistress of Windward Manor. The gentleman turned at the sound of her approach, a tall, distinguished figure with silver-streaked dark hair and penetrating eyes that assessed her with immediate interest. He appeared perhaps 50, his bearing suggesting both breeding and intellect. "Ah," he said, offering a courteous bow. "You must be the new Mrs. Montgomery. James wrote to me of his marriage, but his description failed to do you justice." Emma extended her hand with the poise she had cultivated these past weeks. "You have me at a disadvantage, sir." "Forgive me," he replied, taking her fingers briefly in a formal greeting. "Edward Blackwood, an old friend of your husband's father. I practice law in Boston, but maintain connections here in New Hampshire." His smile held genuine warmth. "I was delighted to receive James's invitation. It's been too long since I visited Windward Manor." Before Emma could inquire further about this unexpected invitation, the front door opened again, admitting James himself. He looked slightly wind-blown, as if he had ridden hard from town, but his expression brightened visibly upon seeing Emma on the stairs. "I see you've met my wife," he said to Blackwood, moving immediately to Emma's side and taking her hand in a gesture both possessive and reassuring. "Indeed," Blackwood nodded. "Though we've barely exchanged pleasantries, your message suggested urgency, so I came directly." James's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "And I appreciate your prompt response, Edward. We have much to discuss." He turned to Emma, his eyes communicating something beyond his casual words. "I hope you don't mind the addition to our dinner party, my dear. Edward's counsel may prove invaluable in certain matters we've been considering." Understanding dawned. James had not waited for her report, but had taken independent action after their morning conversation. He had summoned legal counsel. Not local representation, but someone from Boston, someone beyond Victoria and Dr. Bennet's immediate influence. "Not at all," Emma replied smoothly. "Mr. Blackwood is most welcome." She turned to the lawyer with genuine warmth. "I hope you'll forgive our informal reception. Had we known you were coming, we would have prepared more appropriately." Blackwood waved away her concern with the ease of a man comfortable in any setting. "The best hospitality is unplanned, Mrs. Montgomery, and I've known this house since James was a boy, running wild along the cliffs. Formality would seem strange between old friends." The easy interaction was interrupted by Victoria's appearance. At the top of the stairs, she descended with measured grace, her expression shifting from social readiness to sharp interest as she registered the visitor's identity. "Edward Blackwood," she exclaimed, extending both hands in greeting as she reached them. "What an unexpected pleasure. It's been, 3 years since Caroline's funeral." Blackwood accepted her hands briefly, his smile cooling several degrees. "Mrs. Harrington, Yes, I believe that was our last meeting. You're looking well. Victoria preened slightly at the compliment, though it had been delivered with minimal warmth. I'm visiting to ensure Oliver maintains connections to his mother's family. So important. For a child's sense of heritage, don't you think? Family connections can indeed be valuable, Blackwood agreed neutrally, when they serve the child's best interests. Something in his tone suggested reservation, and Emma noted how Victoria's smile faltered momentarily before regaining its practiced brilliance. There was history here, something beyond polite acquaintance. James ended the increasingly tense exchange by offering his arm to Emma. Shall we move to the drawing room? Oliver will join us shortly for a brief visit before his supper. The small procession moved from the entry hall into the more intimate drawing room, where a fire crackled pleasantly against the evening chill. James guided Emma to a seat near the hearth, positioning himself beside her in a gesture that seemed deliberately protective. Victoria and Blackwood took chairs opposite, creating a conversational square that somehow felt like opposing camps. I understand congratulations are in order, Blackwood said, addressing both James and Emma. Though I must admit the news of your marriage came as a surprise. Last time we corresponded, James, you seemed determined to maintain your solitude. James's hand found Emma's, resting lightly over her fingers. Circumstances change, Edward, sometimes in unexpected but fortunate ways. Victoria made a small sound, too controlled to be called a snort, but conveying similar sentiment. Indeed. Most unexpected. Emma was our housekeeper until quite recently, a rather meteoric rise in station. Not housekeeper, James corrected mildly. Emma served as a seamstress and occasionally assisted Mrs. Fitzgerald with household matters, but her background is quite different from what her temporary employment might suggest. Blackwood's eyebrows rose slightly, his gaze moving between the three adults with increasing interest. Is that so? Emma's father was Professor Henry Wilson of the Boston Conservatory, James continued. He later taught music privately, including lessons to my late wife. Emma herself is an accomplished pianist and composer. Victoria leaned forward, eyes gleaming with anticipation. Yes, such a fascinating connection, though curiously difficult to verify, as we were just discussing earlier today. Emma felt James's hand tighten slightly over hers, a silent message of support. Verification sometimes depends on who's asking and why, he remarked, his casual tone belied by the steel underneath. Fortunately, Edward has extensive connections in Boston. Perhaps he might assist in clarifying any administrative confusions. The strategic move was beautifully executed. Whatever Victoria had expected from this encounter, it clearly wasn't James actively seeking independent confirmation of Emma's background through his own trusted sources. I'd be happy to make inquiries, Blackwood offered smoothly. The conservatory maintains archives, though the earlier years can be somewhat disorganized, and Boston property records are my particular specialty, given my firm's focus on estate law. Victoria's expression soured momentarily before she recovered her composure. How convenient, though I wonder if such efforts are truly necessary. Surely Emma can provide documentation of her father's position, letters of appointment perhaps, or certificates of merit? The direct challenge hung in the air, but before Emma could respond, Oliver burst into the room, his face alight with excitement that dimmed slightly upon seeing the assembled adults. I didn't know we had company, he said, glancing uncertainly between the visitor and his father. James gestured him forward. Oliver, you remember Mr. Blackwood? He visited when you were younger. The boy approached cautiously, offering a small bow that spoke to his careful tutoring in social graces. Good evening, sir. Blackwood smiled with genuine warmth. Master Oliver, you've grown considerably since our last meeting. I understand you've begun studying music with your new mother. Oliver's face brightened. Yes, sir. I'm learning to play my real mother's lullaby. Mama Emma says I have good hands for piano. The simple statement, delivered with a child's unvarnished honesty, changed the atmosphere in the room more effectively than any adult intervention could have. The naturalness with which Oliver used Mama Emma while simultaneously acknowledging Caroline as his real mother demonstrated a healthy integration that made Victoria's machinations seem suddenly petty and misguided. Blackwood's expression softened further. Music is a wonderful gift. My own daughters studied piano, though neither showed particular aptitude. Perhaps you might favor us with a demonstration after dinner. Oliver looked to Emma for confirmation, his eagerness evident. When she nodded encouragingly, he turned back to the lawyer with newfound confidence. We could play the duet we've been practicing. It's not perfect yet, but Father says practice in front of others builds character. James chuckled. The sound surprisingly relaxed given the underlying tensions in the room. I believe I said practice builds skill, but the principle stands. He ruffled his son's hair affectionately. Now, I believe Mrs. Palmer has prepared your favorite pudding for supper. You may join us for music afterward. Udi, with a quick bow to the adults and a conspiratorial smile at Emma, Oliver departed, leaving behind an almost palpable shift in dynamics. Victoria, momentarily thrown off balance by the boys' obvious comfort with and acceptance of Emma, recovered quickly. Children are impressionable, she remarked with forced lightness. They attach easily to whoever shows them attention. Or perhaps, Blackwood countered gently, they recognize authentic care when it's offered. I've always found children to be remarkably insightful judges of character, Mrs. Harrington, less distracted by surface considerations than we adults often are. The subtle rebuke silenced Victoria temporarily, allowing James to guide the conversation toward dinner, which had been announced by a hovering footman. As they moved toward the dining room, James kept Emma close, his presence a bulwark against Victoria's hostility. The meal progressed with surface civility masking undercurrents of tension. Victoria made several additional attempts to question Emma's background, each one deftly redirected by either James or Blackwood. The lawyer, Emma realized, was no mere acquaintance, but a trusted ally with an analytical mind that missed nothing. As coffee was served in the drawing room afterward, Blackwood accepted Emma's invitation to hear Oliver's musical progress. The boy performed admirably, his small hands moving across the keys with growing confidence as Emma accompanied him in their simple duet. When they finished, the applause was genuine, even Victoria managing polite acknowledgement of the child's achievement. You've taught him well in a short time, Blackwood commented to Emma, as Oliver took his reluctant leave for bed. He has natural ability, certainly, but good instruction makes all the difference. Emma has a gift for teaching, James agreed, his pride evident. What took me months of failed attempts, she accomplished in weeks. Victoria set down her coffee cup with deliberate precision. Yes, she does seem remarkably adept at inserting herself into situations. A true talent. The barb hung in the air until Blackwood cleared his throat meaningfully. James, you mentioned some estate matters you wish to discuss. Perhaps this would be an appropriate time. James nodded, his expression growing serious. Indeed. He turned to Victoria. With polite finality, if you'll excuse us, Victoria, these matters concern family business. The dismissal was unmistakable. Victoria rose with rigid dignity, her complexion flushed with anger beneath careful cosmetics. Of course, I wouldn't dream of intruding on Montgomery affairs, despite my sister's lifelong connection to them. After she had departed, closing the drawing room doors with pointed restraint, James visibly relaxed. Thank you for coming, Edward. The situation has developed faster than I anticipated. Blackwood settled more comfortably in his chair, his expression shifting from social pleasantry to professional focus. Your letter suggested concerns about interference in your domestic arrangements. I presume Mrs. Harrington is the primary source. Victoria and Dr. Thomas Bennett, James confirmed. They've been investigating Emma's background, apparently seeking discrepancies to use against her. And have they found any? Blackwood asked directly, turning his penetrating gaze to Emma. She met his eyes steadily. They claim no record exists of my father at the conservatory, nor of our residence on Marlborough Street. Both assertions are false, yet Victoria seemed quite confident in her information. Blackwood's brow furrowed thoughtfully. Records can be manipulated. Access can be denied to certain inquirers. The question is, why anyone would go to such trouble? He turned to James. What's at stake here, beyond your marriage? James and Emma exchanged glances, a moment of silent communication passing between them. Oliver's trust fund, James said finally. Caroline established it before her death, with Victoria named as secondary trustee should anything happen to me before Oliver reaches majority. Understanding dawned on Blackwood's face. Substantial. Extremely, James confirmed. Caroline inherited considerably from her maternal grandfather. She wanted Oliver's future secured regardless of what might happen to the shipping business. And the trust terms, Blackwood pressed. Standard provisions. Oliver gains control at 25, with allowances for education and establishment before then. Victoria can access funds for his care and maintenance if she becomes his guardian. Blackwood nodded slowly, pieces visibly connecting in his mind. So if something were to happen to you and Emma's position as stepmother were legally compromised, Victoria would have both guardianship and financial control, James finished grimly. A situation that might appeal to someone whose own finances have deteriorated significantly in recent years. And Dr. Bennett's involvement, Blackwood inquired. Unclear beyond his personal relationship with Victoria, James replied, though a man in financial difficulties might find the prospect of access to Montgomery resources appealing. Emma listened to this exchange with growing horror, the full scope of Victoria's possible motivations becoming clear. This wasn't merely about preserving Caroline's memory or preventing an unsuitable match. It was potentially about positioning Victoria to gain control of Oliver and his inheritance. You believe they'd go so far? She asked quietly. To fabricate evidence against me? To actively work against Oliver's happiness and stability? James's expression darkened. I don't know, but I intend to eliminate the possibility entirely. He turned to Blackwood. I want to revise my will and Oliver's trust documents. Victoria's position as potential guardian and trustee needs to be reconsidered and replaced with Emma, Blackwood surmised, studying her with renewed interest. Yes, James confirmed without hesitation. Emma has proven her commitment to Oliver's welfare. I trust her completely with his future should anything happen to me. The simple declaration, delivered without qualification or doubt, touched Emma deeply. Whatever had brought them together, whatever challenges still faced them, James's faith in her character and care for his son was absolute. Blackwood nodded, decision made. I'll begin the necessary paperwork tonight. We can formalize everything tomorrow. He leaned forward, expression serious. In the meantime, I suggest caution. If Victoria and Bennett suspect their position is threatened, they may accelerate whatever plans they've set in motion. I've considered that, James acknowledged. Which is why I've asked Edward to stay at Windward Manor for several days, he added to Emma, both as our legal counsel and as a witness to any unusual developments. The strategic foresight impressed Emma, reinforcing her growing appreciation for the man behind James's reserved exterior. He had anticipated Victoria's moves, countered them decisively and taken steps to protect both his son's interests and Emma's position. As the conversation turned to specific legal matters, Emma found herself watching James with dawning realization. What had begun as an arrangement of convenience, a solution to practical problems, had transformed into something far more significant. James was not merely defending his decision or protecting his household management. He was fighting for her, for the future they might build together. The recognition warmed her from within, a certainty taking root beneath the soil of doubt. Victoria had tried to sow. Whatever came next, whatever evidence might be fabricated or accusations leveled, they would face it not as employer and employee, not as benefactor and recipient, but as true partners with shared purpose. And in that unity lay a strength Victoria had fatally underestimated. Dawn arrived at Windward Manor with decisive clarity. The morning sky swept clean of clouds, the air sharp with salt and possibility. Emma woke early after a night of fitful sleep, her mind cycling through Victoria's accusations and the revelations about Oliver's trust fund. She dressed quickly in a practical morning gown, eager to speak with James before the household fully stirred. She found him already awake, standing at the window in his study, watching the sun's first rays touch the lighthouse garden. He turned. At her entrance, his face showing both weariness and resolve. "You slept poorly as well," she observed, moving to stand beside him. He nodded, reaching for her hand with natural ease, as if such gestures had become essential rather than novel. "I've been considering our next steps. Edward believes Victoria may have bribed someone at the conservatory to deny knowledge of your father. Is such a thing possible?" Emma asked, troubled by the thought. "With sufficient motivation, many things become possible," James replied grimly. "Edward has sent telegrams to colleagues in Boston who can access records independently. By tomorrow, we should have verification of your father's position." Emma squeezed his fingers gently. "Thank you for believing me without such verification." His eyes, when they met hers, held unmistakable warmth. "I know your character, Emma. That's verification enough for me." The simple declaration lingered. Between them, weighted with growing feeling neither had fully acknowledged. Before Emma could respond, a sharp knock interrupted their moment of connection. Blackwood entered, already formally dressed despite the early hour, his expression alert and purposeful. "Forgive the intrusion, but there's been a development. Dr. Bennett has arrived, requesting an urgent meeting. Victoria is with him in the morning room." James's posture straightened, his face settling into the controlled mask Emma had come to recognize as his public countenance. "So, they've decided to force matters." "It appears so," Blackwood agreed. "Would you prefer I join you for this conversation?" James glanced at Emma, a silent question in his eyes. She nodded, drawing strength from his evident trust in her judgment. "Both of you should come," she said firmly. "Whatever accusations they've prepared, I'd rather face them directly." The morning room presented a scene of calculated formality. Victoria and Dr. Bennett stood near the fireplace, their postures suggesting rehearsed solidarity. Victoria wore a gown of somber grey, as if attending a funeral rather than a morning meeting, while the doctor's formal attire spoke to the gravity with which he approached this confrontation. "James," Victoria began immediately, "we must speak with you privately on a matter of some delicacy." "Whatever you have to say can be said in front of my wife and Mr. Blackwood," James replied evenly, guiding Emma to a seat while remaining standing himself, a subtle power positioning that didn't escape Victoria's notice. Dr. Bennett cleared his throat, adopting a practiced expression of professional concern. "It's about Mrs. Montgomery's background. Information has come to light that we feel obligated to share for Oliver's protection and your own." "Indeed." James's tone remained measured. How fortunate that Mr. Blackwood has also been making inquiries on that very subject. Perhaps we should compare findings. The doctor faltered momentarily, glancing at Victoria for direction. She stepped forward, her composure brittle but intact. There's no need for comparison. Our evidence is quite definitive. She withdrew, a folded document from her sleeve. This certification from the Boston Conservatory states clearly that no Professor Henry Wilson was ever employed there, neither as faculty nor as visiting instructor. She presented the paper with dramatic flourish. James accepted it, scanning its contents briefly before passing it to Blackwood without comment. Furthermore, Victoria continued, gaining confidence from James's silence, property records show no Wilson family at the Marlborough Street address during the period claimed. These are not matters of interpretation, James, but documented facts. Emma watched Blackwood examine the certificate with careful attention, his experienced eyes noting details others might miss. When he looked up, his expression revealed nothing. Interesting, he remarked mildly. The signature on this certification, Professor Harmon Wallace, is quite distinctive. Wallace is the current dean, Dr. Bennett confirmed, a note of smugness entering his voice. A man of impeccable reputation. Indeed he is, Blackwood agreed, which makes it particularly curious that this document bears his signature, as Harmon Wallace has been in Europe for a lecture tour since January and isn't expected to return until June. The statement landed like a stone in still water, ripples of consequence spreading outward. Victoria's complexion paled visibly, while Dr. Bennett's expression cycled rapidly through surprise, alarm, and attempted recovery. There must be some mistake, he blustered. The conservatory assured us. Who precisely at the conservatory provided this certification? Blackwood interrupted, his tone shifting from conversational to prosecutorial. I'd be most interested. In their name, as it appears they've committed forgery. Victoria stepped backward, as if physically struck. Thomas handled the inquiries. I merely accompanied him to... That's quite enough, Victoria, Dr. Bennett cut in sharply. There's no need to... To what? James asked, his voice dangerously quiet. To explain how you obtained falsified documents, to account for your attempts to discredit my wife through fraudulent means. He turned to Blackwood. Would such actions constitute a criminal offense, Edward? Forgery most certainly would, the lawyer confirmed, as would conspiracy to commit fraud, particularly when the apparent motive involves potential financial gain through manipulation of trust documents. Dr. Bennett's facade cracked entirely at this direct reference to underlying motivations. Now see here, Montgomery, no one has mentioned trust documents or financial considerations. This was merely concern for Oliver's inheritance, James finished coldly, which Victoria could control if she successfully removed Emma from her position and then managed to have me declared. What? Incompetent? Or were you considering more permanent solutions to the problem I present? The accusation hung in the air like drawn steel. Victoria gasped, genuine shock replacing calculation. James, how dare you suggest I would never harm you? Caroline was my sister. A sister whose child stands to inherit a considerable fortune, James noted. A fortune you've shown increasing interest in as your own circumstances have deteriorated. Tears gathered in Victoria's eyes. Whether genuine or tactical remained unclear. Everything I've done has been to protect Oliver, to preserve Caroline's memory and ensure her son isn't exploited by opportunists. Her gaze shifted accusingly to Emma, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, observing the unraveling of carefully constructed deceptions with clear-eyed attention. If that were truly your concern, Emma said quietly, you would have noted Oliver's transformation these past weeks, his return to speech, to music, to the simple joys of childhood. Are those the actions of someone exploiting a vulnerable boy? Before Victoria could respond, a commotion in the hallway drew everyone's attention. The door burst open, revealing Mrs. Fitzgerald's flustered form. "Begging your pardon," the housekeeper gasped, "but this gentleman insisted—" She was gently moved aside by an elderly man with silver hair and piercing blue eyes, who leaned heavily on a carved walking stick as he entered. Though clearly advanced in years, he carried himself with dignity and purpose, his gaze sweeping the room with shrewd assessment before settling on Emma. "My dear girl," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "how extraordinary to find you after all this time." Emma stared in confused silence, unable to place the familiar yet strange figure before her. The man smiled gently at her bewilderment. "You wouldn't remember me, clearly. You were just 16 when we last met, at one of your father's small recitals." He approached, studying her face with evident wonder. "But I would know Henry Wilson's daughter anywhere. You have his eyes, his very expression when seated at the piano." Understanding dawned like sunrise. "Professor Thorne," Emma breathed, memory suddenly crystallizing. "My father's colleague from the conservatory." The old man nodded, pleasure lighting his features. "Indeed, though I'm long retired now, with more time for personal interests than academic pursuits." He turned to James with formal courtesy. "Robert Thorne, sir, formerly of the Boston Conservatory. I received Mr. Blackwood's telegram yesterday and came as quickly as age and railways would permit." James stepped forward, extending his hand with genuine gratitude. "Professor Thorne, your timing is impeccable." "So I gather," Thorne remarked, dryly, taking in the tableau of tension his arrival had interrupted. His gaze sharpened as it fell on Victoria and Dr. Bennett. "I understand there are questions regarding Henry Wilson's position at the conservatory." Dr. Bennett shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the door as if contemplating escape. Victoria, however, rallied admirably, her social training asserting itself even as her scheme disintegrated. "We merely sought verification of certain claims," she said smoothly, "for clarity's sake." "Then allow me to provide it," Thorne replied, lowering himself carefully into a chair Emma hurried to offer. Henry Wilson served as visiting professor of piano and composition from 1872 to 1875, before illness forced his withdrawal from formal teaching. His talents were extraordinary, his knowledge profound, though his tenure was regrettably brief. He reached into his coat, withdrawing a leather portfolio. "I've brought documentation, faculty records, concert programs featuring his performances, even student evaluations from his classes. His presence at the conservatory is thoroughly recorded, despite what certain inquiries might have suggested." Victoria's composure finally cracked. "But we were told, the records show exactly what Professor Thorne has described," Blackwood interjected smoothly. "Unless one deliberately consults individuals with reason to obscure the truth." He turned to Thorne with professional interest. "I don't suppose you recall who might have been managing the archives during Dr. Bennett's recent inquiries?" "As it happens, I do," Thorne nodded. "Martin Everett, a distant connection of the Harrington family, if memory serves, junior faculty with administrative duties and considerable gambling debts, according to conservatory gossip. The precise identification of their accomplice visibly devastated whatever remained of Victoria and Dr. Bennett's composure." The doctor tugged at his collar, suddenly constricting around his flushed neck, while Victoria sank onto a nearby settee, her strategic retreat transformed into genuine collapse. "I believe," James said into the damning silence, "that we've established the credibility of Emma's background beyond reasonable doubt. The question that remains is what consequences should follow this attempted deception." Dr. Bennet found his voice, though it emerged strained and desperate. "Montgomery, surely you understand. Professional concerns, Oliver's welfare." "Oliver's welfare was the last of your concerns," James interrupted coldly. "Your motivations were financial, your methods criminal, and your judgment catastrophically poor." He turned to Blackwood. "What options do we have, legally speaking?" The lawyer considered briefly. "Criminal charges could be pursued for the forgery, civil action for defamation and attempted fraud. At minimum, I'd recommend a formal report to the medical board regarding Dr. Bennet's ethical violations." Victoria finally spoke, her voice barely audible. "James, please, Caroline wouldn't want—" "Do not," James said with quiet intensity, "presume to speak for Caroline. She valued honesty above all else. She would be appalled by your actions, Victoria, particularly those involving her son." The truth of this statement registered visibly on Victoria's face, genuine shame replacing calculation for perhaps the first time. Emma, who had remained largely silent through these revelations, moved to James's side. "May I suggest an alternative?" she asked softly. He turned to her, eyebrows raised in question. "Let them leave," she said simply. "Today. Dr. Bennet to face whatever professional consequences Mr. Blackwood deems appropriate, but Victoria to return to Boston without public scandal that would inevitably touch Oliver as well." James studied her face with deepening appreciation. "You're suggesting mercy?" "I'm suggesting what's best for Oliver," Emma clarified. "He's lost enough family already." The simple wisdom of her proposal, prioritizing the child's welfare above retribution, seemed to affect everyone in the room. Professor Thorne nodded approval, while Blackwood's expression reflected professional admiration for a solution that balanced justice with compassion. "Very well," James decided. "Victoria, you will depart Windward Manor today. Your contact with Oliver will be supervised and at our discretion henceforth." He turned to Bennet. "As for you, Doctor, Edward will outline specific conditions regarding your professional future. Be grateful they don't include imprisonment." The pronouncement, delivered with quiet authority, marked the conclusion of Victoria's campaign against Emma as definitively as if papers had been signed and sealed. Within hours, she had packed her belongings and departed for Boston, her farewell to Oliver brief and subdued under Emma's watchful presence. As the carriage, bearing Victoria and Dr. Bennet, disappeared down the long drive, James stood with Emma on the manor's front steps, his arm around her waist in a gesture no longer tentative, but possessive and protective. "You continue to surprise me," he remarked, gazing down at her with unconcealed admiration, "offering mercy when vengeance would have been entirely justified." Emma leaned into his embrace, drawing strength and offering comfort simultaneously. "Vengeance perpetuates pain. This family has experienced enough of that." "This family," James repeated, the simple phrase carrying profound acknowledgement. "Our family." Their moment of quiet understanding was interrupted by Oliver, racing from the house with a sheet of music clutched in his hand. "Mama, Emma! Professor Thorne says he knew your father. He's going to tell me stories while you play father's favorite. Sonata!" The boy's excitement, his animation so different from the silent child Emma had first encountered, was its own vindication, more powerful than any legal triumph could have been. That evening, as lamplight gilded the music room in warm gold, Emma played while Professor Thorne regaled Oliver with tales of Henry Wilson's concerts and teaching. James watched from his favorite chair, his expression one of contentment long absent from Windward Manor's rooms. Later, after Oliver had been tucked into bed with promises of music lessons continuing tomorrow and always, James led Emma to the lighthouse garden, now silvered by moonlight and spring's first tentative growth. "I have something to ask you," he said, his voice carrying an unfamiliar note of uncertainty. Emma looked up at him, curious. "What is it?" Our marriage began as an arrangement, he said carefully. Practical, logical, beneficial to Oliver. He took her hands, holding them with gentle reverence. But what's grown between us is something else entirely. Something I never expected to find again. Understanding dawned in Emma's eyes as James continued, his voice deepening with emotion. I'm asking if you would consider another ceremony. Not a legal formality this time, but a true beginning. A marriage chosen with open hearts and clear sight. His fingers tightened slightly around hers. I'm asking if you would marry me again. Emma Wilson Montgomery, not because it solves a problem, but because I have come to love you. The declaration, so long unspoken yet increasingly evident in his actions, filled the night air with quiet power. Emma felt tears gather, not of sorrow or uncertainty, but of completion. Yes, she whispered, rising on tiptoe to touch his face, with gentle fingers, because I have come to love you too. Their kiss, beneath the watching stars and surrounded by a garden beginning to bloom after long dormancy, sealed a promise already written in music, in care, in courageous choices made when easier paths beckoned. Within Windward Manor, a household, once frozen in grief, continued its gradual thaw, each day bringing new warmth, new growth, new harmonies to rooms too long dominated by silence. And if sometimes, in quiet moments, Emma thought she felt Caroline's approving presence in Oliver's music, in James's renewed laughter, in the lighthouse garden's determined blooming, she welcomed it with grateful heart. Some inheritances, after all, are meant to be shared rather than possessed. Some legacies grow stronger in new hands, and some loves, beginning in the most unlikely circumstances, prove themselves true in the face of every challenge, blooming, like spring flowers after the longest winter. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.